If I had to describe myself in a single word, it would be inconvenient. Not because I lack charm from it, but because I, Jasper, the Jester, am the sole bearer of truth in a kingdom that prides itself on delightful deceit. Imagine, if you will, a land where honesty is as rare as a sober bard at a tavern, and I am the unwelcome spark in a powder keg of polished falsehoods. The grand throne room of King Reginald the Radiant is a spectacle of contradictions. Velvet banners flutter alongside whispered lies, and the air hums with the buzz of sycophants eager to please a monarch fond of proclamations as capricious as the weather. Today, the king had decreed that all citizens must wear hats shaped like their favorite animal on Tuesdays, a law that baffled even the royal tailors. I stood center stage, cap bells jingling merrily, ready to perform the usual dance of flattery and folly. But the truth, like an ill-mannered guest, insisted on barging in uninvited. "Your Majesty," I began, bowing with exaggerated grace, "perhaps a law mandating hats shaped like animals will bring us closer to nature, or at least closer to resembling a circus." A gasp rippled through the hall. Courtiers clutched their pearls and muttered behind fans. The king's face flushed a shade deeper than his robes. "Jasper," he said with a tight smile, "your wit is as sharp as ever, but less biting might serve us better." "Ah, but sire," I replied, "a court without honesty is like a stew without seasoning, bland and forgettable." The laughter was nervous, the kind that precedes a storm. It was then Lady Mirabelle, the soothsayer draped in scarves and mystery, stepped forward. Her voice, soft and wavering, cut through the tension. "A prophecy," she intoned, "has surfaced in the whispering woods. A war fueled not by steel or fire, but by illusions and enchanted lies." Eyes darted toward me, as if I were the living embodiment of that war truth itself, threatening to unravel the kingdom's carefully spun tapestry. Later, under the dim glow of twilight, I found myself wandering the labyrinthine corridors of the castle. The stones beneath my feet whispered secrets, and the shadows seemed eager to share their tales. It was here, between the echoes of footsteps and hushed conspiracies, that I overheard talk of a plot, one that would soon thrust me from the safety of my fool's cap to the precarious throne of the kingdom. The realization was as chilling as the night air that brushed my cheek. To be the only truth-teller was a curse, but perhaps also a weapon. The question was, could a fool wield it wisely? As dawn painted the courtyard in hues of gold and rose, I stood alone, contemplating the chaos my candor had stirred. The kingdom, for all its pomp and pageantry, teetered on the brink of a war unlike any other. And in the midst of it all, a jester with nothing but truth and a crooked smile to offer. I adjusted my cap, letting the bells jingle softly. After all, every fool has his day, and mine was just beginning. I never imagined that a day could begin with a joke and end with a crown. But then again, in this kingdom of enchanted truths and fanciful lies, the unexpected is the only expectation. It all started in the echoing emptiness of the throne room, where the king had vanished as mysteriously as a magician's rabbit, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the golden tapestries that draped the walls. There I was, Jasper, the fool with the brightly colored cap and bells that jingled whenever I moved, standing before a sea of faces that didn't quite know whether to laugh or tremble. The crown, a heavy circlet wrought from gold and studded with gems that glittered like trapped stars, was placed upon my head with the awkwardness of a bad punchline. It slipped once, nearly tumbling into my lap, and I had to catch it with a hand that was still trembling, not from fear, but from the absurdity of it all. "Long live King Jasper!" someone shouted, though whether in jest or genuine hope, I could not tell. The courtiers exchanged uneasy glances. The advisors whispered behind their fans and beards. Lord Grimble, the Grand Vizier, with a beard long enough to sweep the floor, looked as though he'd swallowed a particularly sour lemon. "A jester as king," he muttered, eyes narrowed. "This will be the ruin of us all." But the throne was empty, and the kingdom needed a leader. The old king's disappearance wasn't just inconvenient, was a ticking time bomb beneath the fragile peace we clung to. So, there I was, a fool crowned by accident and necessity, trying to make sense of a script I had never rehearsed. My first audience was a comedy of errors. I stood before the council, attempting to deliver a speech, but instead, my words stumbled out like a drunken minstrel's tune. "My lords and ladies," I began, clearing my throat, "I am neither wise nor noble. I am, in fact, a fool. But perhaps, if folly is all I have, then folly shall be my guide." The room fell silent, then erupted into murmurs. Lady Merthyr, the royal chamberlain, gave me a sly smile, the only sign of encouragement in the sea of disapproval. I suspected she knew more about the game of power than she let on. Leadership, I quickly discovered, was less about grand speeches and more about understanding the tangled web of court politics. The nobles whispered behind closed doors, their smiles tight and their daggers sharper. My honesty was a blade that cut too deep, unraveling the comfortable lies that held their fragile alliances together. Realizing that I couldn't face the looming threat alone, I turned to the kingdom's most unlikely resource, its outcasts, misfits, and fools. The army I envisioned was not of polished knights or fearsome warriors, but a ragtag band of oddballs, each with quirks that made them seem ill-suited for battle, but perhaps perfect for the fight ahead. There was Sir Bumble, a knight whose armor looked as though it had been through one too many brawls, and whose coordination was more slapstick than skill. There was Whisper the Silent, a scout who never spoke a word but conveyed everything through gestures and sharp eyes. Gathering them was a riotous affair, filled with mistaken identities, misplaced weapons, and laughter that echoed louder than the clang of swords. In the quiet moments, away from the clamor of court and camp, I found myself alone in my chambers. The cracked mirror reflected a man who wore a crown too heavy for a fool's cap, his eyes searching for the strength to lead when every instinct screamed to run. Doubt was a constant companion, but so was a strange, stubborn hope. For all the chaos and comedy, I realized that truth, no matter how inconvenient, was a weapon more potent than any sword. If I was to be king, then I would wield that truth, awkward and unpolished though it might be, to carve a path through the illusions threatening to engulf us all. And so, with a heart full of uncertainty and a head full of fool's wisdom, I stepped forward into the storm, ready to lead an army of idiots against a war of illusions. The crown might be too heavy for my cap, but it was mine, now accidental, absurd, and entirely real. But as the sun set behind the castle towers, casting long shadows over the uncertain road ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much stranger tale. For in a kingdom where only the jester tells the truth, the real jest is yet to come. It began, as all great military endeavors do, with a parade of calamities. The training grounds, a once pristine expanse of manicured grass and polished stones, quickly became a stage for chaos under my direction. I, the newly crowned monarch whose closest experience to leadership was juggling flaming pies and telling uncomfortable truths, had been charged with shaping this ragtag band of enchanted oddities into an army. An army that, frankly, looked more like a collection of the kingdom's best mistakes Take moth-eyed Marla, for instance. Her eyes, a gift of enchanted night vision, were a constant marvel and a constant headache. While she could spot a shadow in pitch darkness or discern the shimmer of hidden magic, she often mistook innocent illusions for lurking enemies, pointing out invisible threats with a shriek that sent the others scattering. Her wide eyes, glowing faintly even in daylight, gave her an air of permanent astonishment, as if the world was a never-ending surprise party to which she hadn't been invited. Then there was Sir Stumbleton, a knight who might have been valiant if only his own enchanted armor didn't betray him at every turn. The armor was a relic from a long-forgotten enchantment, designed to protect, but cursed to trip its wearer up. So, instead of striking heroic poses, Sir Stumbleton spent most of his time sprawled on the ground, his helmet cocked at an angle that made him look perpetually puzzled. His stature was imposing, but his coordination was not, which made his attempts at discipline both tragic and hilarious. Whispering Wren was a scout who communicated solely through riddles and half-truths, a gift that was less practical and more maddening. Her soft voice, cloaked in feathers that seemed to flutter even without wind, would issue cryptic warnings that left the rest of the recruits scratching their heads or arguing amongst themselves about the meaning of her words. It was like trying to lead a conversation with a riddle wrapped in an enigma and sprinkled with nonsense. My first attempt at drilling this motley crew was, unsurprisingly, a disaster. Commands were misheard, abilities misused, and the enchanted quirks that made each soldier unique also made uniformity a cruel joke. "Forward march," I shouted, only to see moth-eyed Marla sprint off in the opposite direction, convinced she'd spotted an invisible enemy. Sir Stumbleton tripped over his own feet, sending a shower of sparks as his armor clanged against the stones. While whispering, Wren whispered a cryptic warning about shadows dancing between soldiers that no one understood. Despite the chaos, I refused to despair. If this army was to stand against a war of illusions, perhaps their quirks were not flaws but hidden strengths. After all, if you can't trust illusions, the ability to see through them or confuse the enemy with nonsense might be the very edge we needed. This theory was put to the test sooner than expected. One foggy morning, while the recruits bumbled through a routine exercise, moth-eyed Marla suddenly stopped, her luminous eyes narrowing. "There," she whispered, pointing to a cluster of trees where the morning mist seemed thicker, shimmering unnaturally. I approached cautiously, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and skepticism. As I peered into the mist, the shapes began to shift, phantoms, mirages, illusions designed to confuse and disorient. It was the enemy's magic in action, weaving falsehoods into the very air we breathed. "This is it," I declared. "The war isn't just about swords and shields. It's a battle of perception." The recruits gathered, their earlier mishaps replaced by focused attention. Sir Stumbleton, brushing dirt from his armor after another spectacular stumble, gave a determined nod. Whispering Wren, for once, spoke plainly. Truth cuts through veils that shadows weave. A strange camaraderie blossomed from the shared understanding. We were no longer just a band of enchanted fools. We were a force uniquely equipped to face the enemy's illusions. The absurdities that had once been our weaknesses could become our greatest weapons. That evening, around a flickering campfire, I shared with them what I had learned. "We're not conventional," I admitted, "nor are we perfect. But the enemy expects armies of steel and silence. They do not expect laughter, honesty, or the kind of foolishness that makes no sense at all." The firelight danced across their faces, illuminating hope where doubt had once resided. "We fight not just with swords," I continued, "but with truth and wit. We dismantle illusions with laughter and expose lies with honesty. The night sky stretched vast and unknowable above us, but for the first time, the path ahead seemed less daunting. Our army of absurdity, stitched together by enchanted quirks and unconventional wisdom, was ready to face a war like no other. And as I looked around at the faces lit by fire and resolve, I realized that sometimes the greatest truths come wrapped in the most ridiculous of packages. So, with a heart full of hope and a head full of foolery, I prepared to lead this unlikely band into the unknown. The war of illusions awaited, and we were ready to meet it with a smile, a jest, and the unyielding power of honesty. In the whimsical realm where truth was the jester's sole province, the shadows often hid more than just murky corners. They concealed secrets, curled tight in whispers and half-truths. Jasper, now not merely the kingdom's fool, but its unlikely king, paced the narrow corridor leading to Mordecai's chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of smoldering incense and old parchment, a sensory cloak as thick as the soothsayer's web of lies. Mordecai sat hunched behind a cluttered desk, his fingers nervously tracing arcane symbols on brittle scrolls. His eyes flicked up, narrowing with suspicion and fear as Jasper's boots echoed against the stone floor. "Ah, your majesty," the soothsayer croaked, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Come to hear more of the kingdom's doom." Jasper grinned, the bells on his cap jingling faintly. "Or perhaps, to hear the truth behind your so-called visions, Mordecai." The soothsayer shifted, the room's flickering candlelight casting his face into a patchwork of light and shadow. "Prophecies are delicate instruments," he whispered, "meant to guide, not to bind, or to frighten, to control." Jasper countered, stepping closer. "Your prophecies have sown fear like a plague, twisting loyalties and turning neighbor against neighbor." Mordecai's lips pressed into a thin line. "And yet the kingdom listens. They need something to believe in, even if that belief is cloaked in foreboding." Jasper's eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and resolve. "Then it's time they believed in something else, something honest." The confrontation was swift but charged, a dance of words and wit. Jasper's voice, usually a source of courtly amusement, now wielded the sharp edge of truth like a blade. He laid bare the inconsistencies in Mordecai's tales, the conveniently vague predictions that always foretold doom, and the subtle manipulations that kept the kingdom shackled in paranoia. Word spread quickly. The grand hall buzzed with nervous energy as Jasper summoned the court. Mordecai, pale and trembling, found himself on a makeshift stage, the spotlight of scrutiny glaring down like a relentless sun. "Here," the Jasper announced, his voice booming yet laced with satire. "The soothsayer's prophecies, a tragic comedy of errors, a manual for fear-mongering." He reenacted the most infamous predictions with exaggerated flare dragons that never came, plagues that missed their mark, wars that dissolved in smoke. Laughter rippled through the crowd, uneasy at first, then genuine. Some courtiers exchanged glances, realization dawning like a slow sunrise. Lady Mirabelle, standing nearby, whispered to Sir Percival, "Could it be that we've been puppets to a charlatan's script?" "Or perhaps," Sir Percival replied gruffly, "we've needed the script more than the truth." After the spectacle, Jasper found himself alone in the palace gardens. The moon cast silver light over dew-speckled leaves, and the night's chill crept under his skin. Lady Mirabelle joined him, her gaze thoughtful. "Some lies," she mused, "are like the mortar in a crumbling wall. Without them, everything falls apart." Jasper nodded slowly. "But walls built on lies are prisons as much as protection. I wonder if truth can build something stronger, even if it cracks and shifts." She smiled faintly, only a fool would try. Later, in the solitude of his chambers, Jasper stared at the shattered remnants of a crystal ball, the soothsayer's prized possession, now broken. The fragments glittered in the candlelight like shattered dreams. Was fate a fixed path, or a tapestry woven by belief? Did free will hold sway, or were they all actors in an absurd play written long before their cues? Jasper's heart ached with the weight of the questions, but also beat with the thrill of possibility. The truth, he realized, was not a blunt instrument, but a sharp wit. A dance of light and shadow, a puzzle with pieces yet to be placed. And as the kingdom's sole bearer of honesty, he was both fool and king, jester and seer, tasked with turning the tide of illusions with nothing but a fool's cap and a sharp tongue. As dawn crept over the horizon, Jasper donned his motley once more, the bells jingling a hopeful tune. The soothsayer's reign of fear was broken, but the war for the kingdom's soul was only beginning. And so, with a grin and a bow, Jasper stepped out to face a world eager for truth, yet still tangled in the webs of enchanted lies. The punchline was his to deliver, and the kingdom waited, breath held and hearts uncertain, for the next act in this comedy of errors. After all, Jasper mused aloud, if fate has any sense of humor, it's going to be a good one. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the jester's tale was far from finished. The dawn broke over the shimmering plains like a bad joke told at the wrong time, Mokewood, unexpected, and slightly unsettling in its timing. The jester stood at the head of his ragtag army, the motley colors of their garb swirling in the morning breeze, reflecting the chaotic spirit of the moment. Around him, the soldiers fidgeted nervously, unsure whether to trust their senses or the odd spark of hope that had begun to kindle in their hearts. Ladies, gentlemen, and those who prefer not to be categorized, the jester began, his voice ringing clear and crisp. Today we face an enemy who dresses in smoke and mirrors, quite literally. Their weapons are lies, their armor made of illusions. But we have something far more powerful, truth, and a bit of well-timed foolishness. Sergeant Blunderbuss gave a hearty laugh, his armor clanging loudly. Aye, sire. And if that fails, I have a knack for tripping over my own feet and taking half their battalion with me. The jester grinned, tapping his cap spells with a finger. Excellent strategy, Sergeant. We'll call it the Blunderbuss Ballet. As the enemy forces materialized on the horizon, the ground seemed to ripple like heat waves on a summer's day. Soldiers appeared and vanished, their forms flickering between solid and ephemeral. Arrows sang through the air only to dissolve into harmless sparks moments before impact. The jester's army hesitated, eyes wide as the battlefield itself seemed to warp around them. Remember, the jester called out, what you see is not always what is. Trust your wits, not your eyes. And if you see something that looks too good to be true, well, it probably is. The illusionist general emerged from the mist like a shadow given shape. His robes swirled in impossible patterns, colors shifting and blending as if painted by an artist with a very mischievous streak. His voice was a smooth melody, laced with mockery and menace. Ah, the fool turned king, he purred. Tell me, do you truly believe your truth can pierce the veil of deception? Or are you simply another pawn dancing to the tune of fate's cruel jest? The jester stepped forward, unflinching. I believe, he said, that even the cruelest jest is no match for a good laugh and a keen eye. With a swift gesture, Mimsy the Mirror Mage raised her enchanted mirror. The glass shimmered, catching the distorted images surrounding them and twisting them back on their creators. Enemy soldiers faltered, their own illusions tripping them up, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Sergeant Blunderbuss charged forward, tripping on a stray root and crashing into a cluster of illusionary archers. The archers' bows snapped mysteriously, arrows flying harmlessly into the sky. The soldiers of the Jester's army roared with laughter and seized the moment to press forward. Confusion, the Jester quipped, the oldest trick in the book. But when the book is upside down and the pages are missing, you have to improvise. The clash of steel and magic echoed across the plains, punctuated by the Jester's sharp observations and the army's growing confidence. Illusions shattered beneath the relentless light of truth, and for the first time, the enemy's fearsome magic seemed less like an invincible wall and more like a house of cards waiting for a well-aimed poke. As the sun climbed higher, the Jester found himself face to face with the illusionist general once more. Their duel was less about weapons and more about words. Siege, sentence, a spell, each retort a shield. You rely too much on honesty, the illusionist sneered. Sometimes, a well-placed lie is necessary to survive. Perhaps, the Jester replied, but when lies are the only currency, the fool who speaks truth can buy the kingdom. With a final flourish, the Jester's laughter rang out, clear and unyielding, breaking through the last of the enemy's enchantments. Around him, his army surged forward, hearts lightened by the knowledge that even in the darkest illusions, a spark of truth could ignite victory. And so, amid the absurdity and chaos, the war of illusions found its first crack in the armor, a crack filled with honesty, humor, and the unshakable spirit of fools who dared to see the world as it truly was. But as the dust began to settle, the Jester knew this was but the opening act. The real challenge was yet to come, and the stage was set for a spectacle where truth and deception would dance a dangerous waltz. Onward, my friends, he declared, for in this theater of war, the fool's cap is mightier than the crown. And with that, the battle raged on, laughter ringing louder than the clash of swords, and truth shining brighter than the most dazzling of illusions. The dawn crept over the battlements like a shy child peeking into a room full of secrets. Jasper, once merely the kingdom's jester, now found himself standing before an army as improbable as a sober drunkard. The motley crew of misfits, fools, and oddly talented oddballs gathered in the dewy morning, their faces a mixture of hope, skepticism, and the faint scent of stale ale. Jasper adjusted his cap, the jingling bells ringing softly a tune of impending change. "Good morrow, brave idiots," he called out, voice ringing with a confidence he was still learning to own. "Today, we abandon the drab drumbeats of war and march to the cadence of laughter and truth." The soldiers blinked, some exchanged wary glances, but the gleam in Jasper's eyes was infectious. He unfolded his plan, a tapestry woven not from swords and shields, but from the cunning art of unmasking illusions with wit and candor. Mistress Snark, ever the skeptic, arched an eyebrow. "You propose to defeat sorcery with jokes and honesty?" she questioned, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Indeed," Jasper replied with a grin, "for what is an illusion but a lie dressed in finery? And who better to unmask lies than a fool who tells the truth?" Captain Blunderbuss scoffed, thumping his chest. "Bah, I've seen more effective tactics in a drunken brawl at the tavern." Yet even he couldn't suppress a chuckle when Grumple, the army's slowest recruit, attempted a simple marching drill only to trip spectacularly over his own foot, landing with a graceless flop that sent nearby soldiers into peals of laughter. This spontaneous comedy thawed the icy doubts that had clung to the camp like morning mist. As the day wore on, Jasper organized training unlike any the kingdom had seen. Instead of rigid drills, he encouraged storytelling, riddles, and mock battles where the weapons were words and the shields were honesty. The soldiers learned to spot the subtle cracks in their foes' magical facades, to challenge illusions not with brute force, but with the unexpected weapon of truth. One moonlit night, Jasper took a small group to test his strategy. They approached an enemy outpost surrounded by shimmering illusions walls that shifted like mirages, enemies that flickered and doubled. Jasper stepped forward, voice loud and clear, and told a story so absurdly truthful about the enemy commander's obsession with collecting enchanted spoons that the illusions wavered, then collapsed like mist under the morning sun. The soldiers stared in disbelief, then erupted into cheers. "It works," Jasper whispered, the weight of the crown feeling just a bit lighter. Yet, not all was smooth. Mistress Snark warned that relying on humor and honesty was a gamble against foes who thrived on deception. "If we falter," she said, "our laughter will ring hollow, and the truth may cut us deeper than any blade." But Jasper was undeterred. He believed that in a world twisted by lies and illusions, only a fool armed with unvarnished truth could turn the tide. As the chapter closed, the Jester's army, once a motley band of misfits, began to see themselves as something more, a force that could defy magic with the sheer power of wit and candor. And so, the war of illusions was met not with swords alone, but with laughter that echoed through the enchanted forests and truth that burned brighter than the fiercest spell. It began, as most things did in this topsy-turvy kingdom, with a reflection, or rather, 1,000 reflections. Standing at the edge of what should have been a straightforward battleground, I found myself staring into an endless hall of mirrors. The enemy had outdone themselves. Walls of glistening glass rose from the earth, each pane shimmering with enchantments that distorted, duplicated, and multiplied every image. Our army, my army, was caught in a funhouse of magical trickery. The only problem was, this wasn't a carnival ride, it was a war zone. I adjusted my fool's cap, the bells jingling nervously as I took a deep breath. The court might have enjoyed my honesty, but honesty on a battlefield was a different matter entirely. "Well," I muttered to myself, "if everyone else is lying, at least I have the truth on my side. Though judging by these mirrors, the truth might be playing hide and seek." Sir Bumblebottom, our esteemed captain of the idiots, stumbled beside me, his oversized helmet wobbling perilously. "Your Majesty," he said, squinting at the kaleidoscope of reflections, "which one is the enemy? All I see are hundreds of me, and none of them look particularly threatening." "That's the point," I replied, trying to keep the dry humor from spilling into panic. "They want us to waste time chasing shadows and reflections. But shadows can't bite, and reflections don't bleed." Bumblebottom attempted a brave nod, only to trip on his own feet moments later, sending a clatter of armor plates jingling like a maraca. The troops around us suppressed chuckles, the tension momentarily broken by the captain's pratfall. Even amid the chaos, camaraderie found a foothold. Our scout, Flick, darted forward, his small frame weaving between the mirrored walls with the grace of a squirrel and the eyes of a hawk. "Your Majesty," he called, voice sharp and eager. "I think I've found a way through. The reflections don't cover every inch. There are cracks and spaces where the magic falters." I raised an eyebrow. "Lead the way then, but stay sharp. This is no ordinary maze. It's an illusionist's playground, and our foe is a master of deceit." As we followed Flick's lead, the mirrors began to twist and ripple, the surface shimmering like liquid mercury. From atop a raised pedestal of gleaming glass, Mira, the enchantress, materialized. Her robes flowed with iridescent hues, and her eyes, reflecting countless images, bore into me with a mixture of amusement and menace. "Ah, the fool who speaks truth," she purred, voice echoing eerily through the mirrored hall. "Did you think you could outwit illusions with mere honesty? How quaint," I grinned, the bell on my cap jingling in defiance. "Dear mirror, sometimes the simplest truth is the sharpest blade. You spin your webs of glittering lies, but even a fool can see through the shimmer." With a flick of her wrist, the mirrors pulsed, and the reflections exploded into a dazzling array of illusions, phantoms of soldiers, shifting landscapes, and haunting laughter. The battlefield twisted into a surreal dance of light and shadow. Sir Bumblebottom charged, rallying the troops with a booming, if somewhat off-key, battle cry. But every step he took, another Bumblebottom appeared, stumbling in perfect slapstick synchronization, turning the charge into a chaotic ballet of confusion. Our soldiers found themselves laughing and tripping, their focus fractured by the absurdity. I called out, "Remember, comrades, the real enemy doesn't stumble. Follow the truths you know, not the lies you see." Slowly, the tide began to turn. Using humor as a shield, I pointed out the inconsistencies in the illusions, the way a reflection's shadow didn't match its source. The sound of footsteps echoed too late, the way the air felt cooler near the real path. Flick led us through the gaps in the glass maze, his keen eyes guiding our steps. Each breakthrough was met with renewed hope, the laughter of confusion turning into cheers of cautious triumph. Mira's smile faltered, her illusions flickering like a candle in a draught. "You may see through my tricks, fool," she hissed, "but the game is far from over." "Oh, I do love a good game," I replied, bowing mockingly, "especially when the rules are made up and the points don't matter." As the army rallied behind me, we emerged from the labyrinth of mirrors more united and determined. The battlefield, once a maze of deception, had become a stage for our own brand of truth and folly. But as we prepared for the next act, I couldn't help but wonder how many more illusions awaited us, and would our laughter be enough to shatter them all? The jingle of my cap was louder now, a clarion call to the absurdity and courage that defined us. And in this enchanted kingdom where lies were currency, perhaps the greatest weapon was a fool who refused to lie. With a final glance at the shimmering battlefield behind us, I muttered, "Onward, my army of idiots. Let's show them how truth dances with folly." And so, the dance continued, mirrors, reflecting not just illusions, but the indomitable spirit of a fool turned king. The court of confusion, the throne room, usually a place of pomp and predictability, had become a theater of whispered plots and barely concealed panic. The absence of the jester turned king was more than just a gap on the throne, it was a chasm into which every rumor, every petty ambition, poured unchecked. Courtiers shuffled about in their finery, faces painted with smiles that never quite reached their eyes, voices hushed but sharp as daggers. Lady Marigold, ever the picture of serene competence, moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through fog. Her emerald robes swished softly, a stark contrast to the murmur of scheming that filled the marble hall. She had always been a loyalist, her devotion to the kingdom unwavering, even when the old king had been more interested in his wine than his subjects. Now, with the jester gone from sight, she found herself a reluctant anchor among the swirling currents of uncertainty. "Have you heard?" whispered Mistress Wren, sidling up to Marigold with a glint in her eye. The court gossip was a diminutive whirlwind of energy, eyes darting like a bird's as she delivered her latest tidbit. "They say Lord Fumbleton is gathering allies for some grand scheme. A coup, perhaps." Marigold's gaze flicked toward the rotund figure of Lord Fumbleton, who was currently engaged in a lively conversation with a group of equally suspicious-looking nobles. His overly bright clothes and greasy mustache gave him the appearance of a man trying too hard to stand out, an impression that suited his ambitions perfectly. "Fumbleton has always fancied himself a kingmaker," Marigold murmured, "but without the Jester here, the court is a nest of vipers." Meanwhile, Sir Reginald paced near the main entrance, his polished armor reflecting the flickering torchlight. His expression was as stern as the steel he bore, every furrow in his brow a testament to his concern for the kingdom's stability. The guardsmen under his command were restless, their loyalty as uncertain as the day was long. "The palace holds more secrets than the deepest dungeons," Sir Reginald confided to Marigold during a brief moment of privacy, "and in the Jester's absence, those secrets are taking on a life of their own." The irony was not lost on her. The man who had once been the kingdom's fool, the sole bearer of truth, was now a ghost within his own quarter, truth-teller absent in the very place that needed him most. As the day wore on, Jasper, disguised in the motley of his former professions, slipped quietly into the palace corridors. His sharp eyes caught every glance, every whispered word, every furtive gesture. He was both observer and participant in this grand game of deception and ambition. In the dim light of a narrow hallway, Lady Marigold confronted Lord Fumbleton. Their voices were low but charged with veiled menace. "You play a dangerous game, Lord Fumbleton," she said, her tones silk wrapped around steel. "The kingdom needs stability, not your self-serving chaos." Fumbleton chuckled, a sound like a frog clearing its throat. "And what would you have me do, dear lady? Bow to a jester's whim? The throne without a king is a prize worth seizing." Their exchange was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Mistress Wren, who brandished a folded note like a weapon. "This just arrived," she announced, eyes gleaming. "An invitation to an exclusive gathering where the fate of the kingdom will be decided." Marigold unfolded the note, her expression darkening. "The court is unraveling," she whispered. Jasper stepped forward, revealing himself with a flourish that drew startled gasps. "Or perhaps," he said with a crooked smile, "it is simply untangling the lies that have bound it." The courtiers turned, some aghast, others intrigued. The Jester's presence was a bomb and a challenge, his honesty cutting through the fog of deceit like a blade. "We are at a crossroads," Jasper declared, his voice ringing with unexpected authority. "Choose loyalty to the kingdom, or be swept away by the tides of your own making." The room fell into a charged silence, broken only by the distant clang of armor and the rustling of silk. In that moment, the court of confusion held its breath, teetering on the edge of chaos and order. As the evening shadows lengthened, Jasper realized that leadership was less about commands and more about the fragile trust he could inspire. In a kingdom built on lies, truth was not just a weapon, it was a lifeline. And he, the fool who told the truth, would be the one to throw it. But the question lingered, as persistent as the flickering torchlight: could trust survive in a court built on deception and self-interest? Only time and the next foolish step would tell. It was a truth universally acknowledged in the magical kingdom that everyone lied except the Jester. This, of course, was a truth wrapped in a lie, but that was the kingdom's usual brand of logic, practicality, draped in absurdity. On this particular day, I found myself standing in the royal archives, a dim cavern of dusty scrolls and ancient tomes that smelled faintly of aged cheese and forgotten secrets. The flickering candlelight danced across parchments that shimmered with faint enchantments, as if the very words were alive, whispering in a language only the truly foolish could understand. Master Thatch, The court magician, with his wild white hair and spectacles magnifying eyes that had seen far too much, leaned over a particularly ancient scroll. "These," he said in a voice that sounded like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten forest, "are the binding lies." "Binding lies," I echoed, cocking my head so that a bell jingled on my cap. "Sounds like a government program." He chuckled, a sound like a creaky door opening. "Not quite. These are enchanted lies, spells cast long ago that hold the fabric of the kingdom together. Without them, chaos would reign, illusions would shatter, and the very ground beneath our feet might crumble." I blinked, the absurdity of it all swirling in my mind like a drunk bard's tune. "So you're telling me the kingdom is held together by lies?" "Yes," he said simply, "but lies that protect, lies that heal, lies that bind." The room felt colder suddenly, the shadows stretching like fingers across the floor. I shuffled back, my motley feeling heavier than ever. Later, in the council chamber, Lady Verity sat across from me, her deep blue robes a stark contrast to my garish attire. Her silver-threaded gaze was sharp and unwavering. "Your Highness," she began, her voice steady, "honesty has served us well, but not all truths are beneficial. Some lies maintain the peace and morale of the people. To unravel them recklessly could bring ruin." I tapped my fingers on the wooden table, my mind a jigsaw puzzle missing its final piece. "But am I not the Jester, the one who must tell the truth?" She smiled, a sad smile, "And sometimes the greatest truth is knowing when not to speak it." The council listened in silence, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced mockingly on the walls. The paradox of truth and lies hung heavy in the air, a riddle with no easy answer. That evening, I escaped to the castle gardens at twilight. The scent of night flowers was intoxicating, their heavy perfume wrapping around me like a velvet cloak. The distant laughter of the court echoed faintly, playful and cruel all at once. I wandered along the cobblestone paths, the cool air whispering secrets only the fool could hear. How had I become so entangled in these webs of deceit? Was my honesty a beacon or a blunder? Was I the fool or the king? Captain Bumble's voice jolted me from my reverie the next day. In the war room, amidst maps and miniature soldiers, his latest blunderer, disastrously misplaced supply wagon, had the room erupting in laughter. His nervous grin and clumsy apologies reminded me that even amidst chaos, there was strength in camaraderie and shared folly. Perhaps, I thought, the kingdom was not just held together by lies or truths, but by the laughter and resilience that lived between them. As the candle burned low that night, I sat alone, the weight of leadership pressing upon me. The enchanted lies that bound our realm were not mere falsehoods, but a complex tapestry woven with care and necessity. To lead was to navigate this delicate balance, to know when to speak and when to smile in silence. And so, with a fool's heart and a king's burden, I resolved to embrace the paradox, to wield truth and lie alike as tools in the grand performance of governance. But just as I thought I understood the script, a new whisper stirred the prophecy, ever so unlucky, hinting that the greatest illusion was yet to come. And with it, the question, was I fool or king, or merely a player in a far grander jest? The game was far from over, and the punchline, I suspected, was yet to be delivered. The grand hall of the Illuminary Palace was no longer a place anyone could recognize with certainty. What once had been solid stone walls and polished marble floors now rippled like liquid glass, as if the very fabric of reality was being kneaded by unseen hands. Chandeliers hung upside down from the ceiling, their candles flickering wildly yet casting shadows that danced with a life of their own. independent of their flickering flames. The air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and ozone, a scent that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I stood at the center of this surreal stage, my fool's cap jingling softly with each nervous twitch of a head or shrug of a shoulder. Facing me was Mordrith the illusionist, the enemy's enigmatic leader whose reputation for weaving nightmares and fantasies alike was as legendary as his disdain for honesty. He was draped in robes that shimmered and shifted like smoke caught in a breeze, his face obscured by a mask that flickered one moment beautiful, the next terrifying. His eyes gleamed with a cunning that could have frozen a lesser man in place. "Ah, your majesty," Mordrith purred, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "I trust you're ready to dance with shadows, to play with mirrors and smoke." I adjusted the motley around my shoulders and grinned, the bells on my cap chiming. "More ready than you think, Mordrith. After all, a fool's greatest weapon is the truth, something your illusions can never wear like a cloak." Sergeant Bumble shuffled beside me, his armor clinking awkwardly. He gave a nervous glance at the swirling room. "Do you think this is safe, sire?" "Safe?" I chuckled. "When have I ever been safe?" Mordrith waved a slender hand, and the walls around us began to warp further, twisting into impossible angles and shapes. The floor beneath my feet shifted like a kaleidoscope, colors bleeding into one another and forming dizzying patterns. From the edges of the room, phantasmal figures emerged, ghostly dancers, snarling beasts, and whispering faces that dissolved before you could focus on them. "Behold," Mordrith declared, "the power of illusion. What you see is not what is, and what is will never be trusted." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye real and spectral on me. "Then let us see if your illusions can withstand a fool's honesty." With that, I began, not with magic, for I had little of that sort, but with words, the sharpest tool in my arsenal. I pointed at the nearest phantom, a snarling wolf made of smoke and shadow, and said, "You're not a wolf, but a trick of light and fear. And like all tricks, you're empty underneath." The wolf flickered, its snarls turning to confused whimpers before it dissipated into a wisp of smoke. Encouraged, I moved on, calling out the lies behind each illusion. "This chandelier doesn't hang upside down. It's your mind playing a cruel joke. That echoing laughter, just the wind trapped in your ears." Each truth I spoke cracked the illusions like fragile glass, causing the room to shudder and ripple as if it too was startled. Mordrith's eyes narrowed, and he conjured a swirling vortex of colors and shapes, more dazzling and confounding than anything I had yet seen. The vortex twisted around us, pulling at the edges of reality, threatening to swallow us whole. "You cannot defeat what you cannot hold," he hissed. "Illusions are stronger than truths, for they are what people want to believe." But I smiled, the bells on my cap jingling as I stepped closer. "Ah, but illusions crumble when faced with laughter and light." I launched into a barrage of biting truths wrapped in humor, mocking the grandiosity of the illusions and the absurdity of their creator. "Is that your best? A swirling mess of colors and mirrors. I've seen better magic tricks at a tavern's birthday party." The vortex faltered, colors spilling haphazardly like spilled paint. Mordrith's mask flickered, revealing a flicker of doubt in his gleaming eyes. Our gazes locked, a moment of silence thick with tension. For the first time, I saw behind the mask not a master of deception, but a man fighting to hold on to his illusions. You see through me," he whispered, voice cracking. "Indeed," I replied softly, "because I have no illusions to hide behind." In that suspended moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Then, I did the unthinkable. I laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed through the hall and shattered the tension like glass. The illusions wavered, flickering and dissolving into nothingness. The walls solidified, the chandeliers righted themselves, and the warm, natural light of the sun spilled through the stained glass windows. Mordred staggered back, his mask finally falling away to reveal a face both weary and begrudgingly respectful. "You are a fool, indeed, but perhaps the greatest of all." I bowed with a flourish, bells jingling merrily. A fool who tells the truth is the most dangerous player in any game. Sergeant Bumble clapped me on the back, nearly knocking me over. "Well done, sire. That was, well, extraordinary." "Extraordinary, yes," I replied, eyes still on Mordred. "But this is only the beginning. The war of illusions still brews, and now they know our greatest weapon, a fool who never lies." As we left the illuminary palace behind, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and rose. The battlefield ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, hope flickered in the hearts of the army of idiots I led. For if even the greatest illusionist could be undone by truth and laughter, then perhaps there was a chance we could win this absurd war after all. And if not, well, at least it would be one hell of a story to tell. I never imagined that chasing after enchanted gold would feel rather like trying to herd cats if the cats were invisible, constantly rearranging themselves and occasionally bursting into song. Yet here I was, trailing behind Grimble the Greedy, who was muttering curses under his breath that sounded suspiciously like prayers to some forgotten god of coin. Our journey began at dawn, the sun casting a lazy golden glow over the kingdom, as if mocking my own foolish ambition. Grimble, a merchant whose pockets were as deep as his distrust, insisted on leading the way to the fabled cache of enchanted gold. He claimed to have insider knowledge, which mostly involved overhearing tavern gossip and interpreting the twitch of a beggar's eye. As we ventured into the whispering forest, the trees seemed to lean in closer, their leaves rustling in a way that suggested they enjoyed our discomfort. The gold leaves hanging from the branches shimmered unnaturally, casting eerie reflections that played tricks on the mind. "Keep your wits about you," Grimble warned, clutching his coin pouch as if it were a shield. "This place doesn't take kindly to fools or greed." I snorted. "Suits me perfectly. I'm a fool by trade, and greed is not my style, though I do fancy a shiny bauble now and then." Our path was anything but straightforward. At one point, a sudden burst of laughter echoed from the trees, and a cluster of golden acorns tumbled down, narrowly missing my head. I caught one, feeling its weight and warmth, but the moment it touched my palm, it shimmered and transformed into a tiny singing bird that fluttered away, leaving me blinking in surprise. "Magic's got a sense of humor," Grimble grumbled. Our next stop was a tavern, a raucous den where dwarves with booming voices and shifty eyes gathered. Negotiating with them was akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. I tried to barter for a single glowing nugget, but the dwarves insisted it was worth a king's ransom and a barrel of the finest mead. "How about a joke in exchange?" I offered, producing a sly grin. They paused, intrigued despite themselves. I launched into a tale about a knight who lost his sword but found a chicken instead. The dwarves erupted in laughter, and after much haggling, punctuated by spilled ale and a minor scuffle, we secured the nugget. It pulsed softly in my hand, promising both fortune and folly. As we prepared to return, the enchanted gold revealed its true nature. Attempting to equip my soldiers with helmets forged from the gold resulted in the helmets transforming into singing birds, chirping discordantly amid the ranks. Swords turned into bubbles that floated lazily away. Pop, pop, pop. The battlefield preparations turned into farce. But amid the chaos, an idea took root. Perhaps this is the weapon of choice, I mused aloud. A war of laughter against a war of illusions. Seraphina, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow but nodded thoughtfully. That night, by the crackling campfire, we pondered the meaning of true wealth. It seemed the enchanted gold was less about riches and more about revealing the absurdity of greed and the unexpected value of camaraderie and wit. As dawn approached, the forest outside our camp whispered its secrets once more. I knew the road ahead would be unpredictable and fraught with folly. But also that sometimes the greatest treasure is the laughter shared on the journey. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough to turn the tide. But as I drifted to sleep, the faint glimmer of the enchanted gold caught my eye changing shape again, as if hinting at yet another twist in our tale. If gold was foolish, then I was the fool to lead it, and I was ready to play my part. The prophecy rewritten. If there was one thing Jasper the Jester had learned since donning the crown, it was that the truth was a slippery beast, far more complicated than the simple jests he'd tossed before the court. It had teeth, claws, and an inconvenient habit of biting just when you thought you had it by the tail. And on this particular morning, in the musty shadows of the Royal Library, Jasper was about to discover just how tangled the kingdom's fate could be. "Are you quite sure this is the original scroll?" Jasper asked, eyeing the yellowed parchment held carefully in Quill's trembling hands. Quill, the chronicler, adjusted his spectacles and nodded nervously. "Most assuredly, Your Majesty. This copy predates the soothsayer's public reading by several decades. The language is archaic, but the essence should be intact." Jasper tapped his wooden scepter against the oak table, the soft jingle of the bells in his cap echoing faintly. "Then explain to me why the words here are so very different from what Madame Vex proclaimed to the court." Together, they bent over the scroll, tracing the faded ink with careful fingers. The prophecy, as it had been interpreted, foretold an inevitable war born of lies and illusions, a shadowed doom hanging over the kingdom like a storm cloud. Yet here, in this ancient text, the tone was less dire, almost playful in parts, and with a curious openness about choices yet to be made. "It seems," Quill murmured, "that the prophecy was less a fixed decree and more a warning. A riddle wrapped in metaphor." Jasper grinned, a spark of mischief lighting his eyes. "Sounds like my kind of prophecy. A puzzle, not a prison." But as they studied the text, a more troubling realization dawned on them. The soothsayer's version had twisted words, amplifying fear and uncertainty to tighten her grip on the court's influence. The prophecy had been weaponized, a tool to manipulate and control, not to guide. So the war of illusions, Jasper mused aloud, might just be a war of misinterpretations. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. If the prophecy was a law, at least a half-truth, could rewriting it change the kingdom's course? Could words, once spoken and believed, be undone by new ones? Later that day, the throne room was heavy with tension. Madame Vex stood before Jasper, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You would unravel destiny itself, fool," she hissed. "Some truths are too dangerous to tamper with." Jasper met her glare with steady calm. "And some lies are too heavy to carry. Madame, I'd rather bear the weight of truth even, if it's dressed in a fool's cap, than be shackled by fear." The courtiers whispered, their loyalties wavering like leaves in a storm. Madame Vex's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. The Jester's honesty, once a source of chaos, was now a beacon. Summoning his motley council, Sir Bumble, Quill, and others, Jasper stood in the courtyard beneath a sky streaked with twilight hues. With a dramatic flourish, he unrolled a fresh parchment and read aloud the rewritten prophecy. Gone were the ominous declarations. In their place were words of hope, choice, and the power of unity. This kingdom's fate, he declared, is not written in stone, but in the hearts of its people. Let us choose laughter over despair, truth over fear, and together rewrite our story. Laughter rippled through the crowd, mingling with cheers and the clatter of armor. Even Sir Bumble managed a proud, if somewhat bewildered, smile. As dawn painted the castle walls with gold, Jasper stood atop the battlements, the new prophecy clutched in his hand. Below, faces turned upward, hopeful, uncertain, but alive. In that moment, the Jester understood a profound truth. Stories had power, but it was the telling and the belief behind it that shaped reality. And perhaps, just perhaps, a fool's truth could be the kingdom's greatest magic. But as the sun rose, so too did the distant rumble of war. The rewritten prophecy was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, in turning words into deeds, and laughter into legend. And Jasper, the Jester King, was ready to lead the charge. I always thought that assembling a council would be like gathering a troupe of merry musicians, each playing their part in harmony. Instead, it was more akin to herding enchanted catsif. Those cats were armed with scrolls, swords, and an unhealthy dose of self-importance. The grand chamber where the council met smelled of old parchment, stale wine, and something faintly resembling burnt toast, though no one seemed willing to own up to that last scent. Lady Pompington arrived first, as always, gliding in on a tide of silks and ruffles so vast I half expected her to require a moat around her person. She carried herself with the solemn dignity of a queen, though her frown suggested she thought of us all as particularly dim jesters. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice dripping with the kind of formalities that could curdle fresh cream. "Before we embark upon matters of state, allow me to remind you of the indispensable importance of procedure. Without it, chaos reigns." I nodded sagely, wondering if chaos wasn't exactly the condition I'd inherited, and if procedure might just be a fancy word for bureaucracy's endless game of hide and seek. At that moment, Sir Blunderbuss barged in, his helmet lopsided, and armor jangling like a brass band on parade. "Your Majesty, the enemy approaches," he bellowed, waving his oversized sword like a flag of surrender or possibly confusion. Mistress Quibble followed close behind, her eyes darting over a tome so thick it could double as a weapon. "Technically," she interjected, adjusting her spectacles, "any declaration of war must be preceded by a formal notice, delivered in triplicate and countersigned by at least 2 witnesses. Otherwise, it's merely a misunderstanding of the highest order." "Ah," I said, "so the enemy might be at the gates, but if they haven't filled out the paperwork, we're still at peace." "That's reassuring." The chamber erupted in a flurry of papers as Lady Pompington began outlining the kingdom's regulations, each clause more labyrinthine than the last. It was a masterpiece of obfuscation, designed to sound impressive while accomplishing nothing. I found myself chuckling quietly, which earned me a look from Mistress Quibble that could have frozen molten gold. Amid this chaos, the Whisperer lingered in the shadows, as always. I caught their eye and felt a shiver run down my spine. There's something unsettling about a person who blends so seamlessly into the gloom that you forget they're there until they whisper a secret that changes everything. Your Majesty, the whisperer murmured, slipping a folded note into my palm. Not all who advise have your best interests at heart. I unfolded the parchment discreetly, reading a cryptic warning of a plot brewing beneath the council's farcical meetings. It seemed that while we argued over the shape of imaginary battles and the wording of imaginary letters, real danger was stalking us with a grin as sly as mine. Well, I said aloud, it appears we have more than paperwork to worry about. Lady Pumpington blinked at me as if I'd just suggested we replace the royal seal with a rubber chicken. Your Majesty, might I remind you that decorum is paramount? And might I remind you, I replied, that sometimes the truth prefers a bit of disorder. As the meeting wore on, I learned much about the strange alchemy of governance. Wisdom was often hidden beneath layers of nonsense, and folly at times wore the guise of strategy. Yet, in this motley assembly of misfits, I glimpsed the threads that might just hold our kingdom together, if only we could stop tripping over them long enough to weave them properly. The night ended with no clear solutions, but with a promise that even the most absurd counsel could be the kingdom's greatest strength, if only we could laugh long enough to outwit the shadows gathering beyond our walls. And so, with a heart full of hope and a head full of jingle bells, I prepared for the next act in this comedy of errors. Because in a land where only the fool tells the truth, sometimes the best counsel is a good laugh followed by a sharper blade of wit. But as the candles guttered and the echoes of debate faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real fool was the one who thought this would be easy. After all, history has a cruel sense of humor, and I was its punchline. The siege began not with a clash of swords or the thunder of catapults, but with a decidedly unexpected volley of pies. Yes, pies. Custard, cherry, and an unfortunate number of cream-filled marvels flew through the air like enchanted missiles, splattering on the enemy's battered siege towers and armor with a slapstick splendor that would have made any court jester proud. From his vantage point atop the city walls, the jester turned, king watched with a gleam in his eye and a grin that threatened to split his face. "Let them taste the sweetness of our resistance," he declared, his voice ringing out above the cacophony of laughter and squelching fruit. Around him, his ragtag defenders scrambled to reload their unconventional arsenal. Sacks of slippery marbles, enchanted whoopee cushions that emitted thunderous blasts, and the piece de resistance giant rubber chickens enchanted to squawk insults in the enemy's own tongue. Captain Snort, his trusty and wheezing leader of the city guard, led a contingent of guards decked out in the most ridiculous armor imaginable. Their helmets sported feathers and bells, their breastplates painted in garish polka dots, and their gauntlets fashioned to resemble oversized gloves that seemed more suited for juggling than battle. As they clanked and bumbled forward, their armor jingling and clanging with every awkward step, the besieging forces halted in confusion. The sight was so absurd that the enemy soldiers found themselves doubling over in laughter, their battle lines fraying under the unexpected assault of mirth. Meanwhile, Lady Haphazard, the noblewoman advisor infamous for her erratic and unpredictable strategies, was orchestrating the defense from the war room. The chamber looked less like a command center and more like the aftermath of a carnival gone rogue. Maps were strewn with rubber chickens, exploding whoopee cushions, and hastily drawn caricatures of the enemy's generals. Her hair, a wild tangle that seemed to have a life of its own, shimmered with faint magical hues as she frantically rearranged her plans with manic energy. "If they think they can storm Scilly with swords, let's show them the sharp edge of satire," she proclaimed, her eyes sparkling with a mix of panic and delight. The jester nodded approvingly, recognizing in her madness a kindred spirit. As the siege towers crept closer, the enemy commander, General Fumble, fumed in frustration. His armor was dented and smeared with pie filling, his helmet slipping perpetually over one eye. His attempts to rally his troops were undermined by the uncontrollable giggles and snorts spreading through his ranks like wildfire. Every time he raised his sword to issue a command, a custard bomb or a squawking rubber chicken seemed to find its mark, sending his soldiers into fits of laughter instead of battle. Under cover of darkness, the trickster twins slipped through the enemy lines. Cloaked in shadows and armed with slingshots and enchanted tickle devices, they moved with stealthy grace. Their muffled laughter was contagious, and with every ticklish trap they set, the besiegers succumbed to helpless giggles and convulsions. No soldier could keep a straight face. The battlefield became a theater of absurdity where discipline was replaced by delirious laughter. Back on the walls, the Jester addressed his weary but spirited defenders. "Remember," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "the greatest weapon is a laugh in the face of danger. Let's turn this siege into a festival they'll never forget." The defenders responded with renewed vigor, launching an array of enchanted pies, slippery marbles, and whoopee cushions with a precision that belied their eccentricity. The enemy's morale crumbled under the relentless assault of humor and trickery. What should have been a grim and bloody siege transformed into a riotous carnival where the line between battle and performance blurred. Yet beneath the laughter, there was a sharp edge of truth. The Jester understood that this war of illusions required more than swords and shields. It demanded wit, courage, and the ability to find strength in the ridiculous. For in a kingdom where truth was a rare jewel, and lies were the currency of power, sometimes the fool was the wisest of all. As dawn approached, the enemy's siege engines lay tangled in nets of feathers and custard-soaked ropes, their soldiers too exhausted from laughter to continue the assault. The city of Scilly had held through absurdity, resilience, and a refusal to bow to fear. But the Jester knew better than to rest easy. This victory, as sweet as it was but a single act in the grand farce of war. The final act, he suspected, would demand even greater cunning and a deeper understanding of the strange magic that bound truth and lies together. With a sly grin, he turned from the ramparts, already plotting the next move in this chaotic dance of fools and kings. After all, he mused aloud, in the theater of war, the joke's only funny if everyone plays their part. And so, the siege of Scilly became legend not for its battles of blood and steel, but for the laughter that echoed louder than any war cry, a testament to the power of humor in the darkest of times. Yet, as the city celebrated its improbable defense, shadows stirred beyond the horizon. The war of illusions was far from over, and the Jester's greatest challenges were yet to come. For in a world where truth was a weapon and lies a shield, the line between victory and folly was thinner than ever. The chapter closes on the Jester's thoughtful smile, a man who had turned siege into spectacle, laughter into resistance, and folly into a weapon sharper than any sword. The question lingered, could the kingdom of Scilly survive the next act in this absurd and enchanted war? The curtain rises again, and the fool's play continues. The grand doors of the royal palace swung open with an almost theatrical flourish, as if the night itself had been scripted for spectacle. The air was thick with perfume and anticipation, swirling under the glow of countless crystal chandeliers that scattered light like 1,000 tiny stars caught in a net. A sea of masked faces ebbed and flowed across the ballroom floor, their eyes glittering with secrets and unspoken schemes beneath the elaborate disguises. The Jester, now king though the crown felt as foreign atop his motley head as a caged bird feels in a gilded cage, stepped into the heart of the masquerade with a mixture of amusement and wariness. Around him, the chatter and laughter wove a tapestry of lies and half-truths. This was a dance far more intricate than any performed on the polished marble floor. Every glance was a gambit. Every smile, a carefully calibrated mask of its own. The jester's keen eyes flicked from one guest to another, reading beneath the painted smiles and jeweled visages, sensing which truths lurked beneath the layers of deceit. For all the whimsy and revelry, the masquerade was a battlefield where alliances were forged and broken with a whispered word or a well-timed toast. He caught sight of Lady Merelda, her silver mask shimmering like moonlight caught in a spider's web. She moved with a feline grace, eyes sharp and calculating despite the softness of her gowns. Their paths crossed in a quiet alcove, away from the prying eyes and eager ears of the court. The flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced across their faces, revealing and concealing in equal measure. "Your Majesty," she murmured, voice smooth as silk but edged with steel, "the masks we wear are more than mere costume. They are shields and weapons alike. Tell me, can the fools see through them all?" The jester smiled, a wry twist of lips beneath the painted grin. "I see what lies beneath, Lady Merelda. Sometimes the truth is the most dangerous mask of all." Their exchange was interrupted by a ripple of gasps from the ballroom. The crowd parted like a tide, revealing Lord Grimald in the center, his dark velvet mask torn away to reveal a smirk that was all challenge and contempt. The jester moved toward the disturbance, every step measured and deliberate. "So, the great unmasking," Lord Grimald sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Tell me, fool, what use is your truth when it leaves you so vulnerable?" "Vulnerability," the jester replied coolly, "is the price of honesty, and honesty is the sharpest weapon I wield." The confrontation crackled with the tension of a drawn blade, the court holding its breath in the balance. But the jester's eyes were calm, steady as the moonlight that spilled through the tall windows. As the revelry resumed, the jester found himself alone on the balcony, cool night air washing over him. Below, the distant strains of laughter and music drifted like ghosts through the moonlit gardens. He leaned against the stone balustrade, thoughts swirling as the night deepened. Masks and masquerades, what truths could survive such a night? And how many lies were necessary to keep a kingdom from tearing itself apart? The jester's heart was heavy with questions, yet buoyed by a fragile hope that even in a world built on deception, laughter and truth might yet find a place to dance together. The night was far from over, and the game had only just begun. The jester knew that the masks would come off eventually, but when they did, what would be left beneath? And would the fool's truth be enough to hold the kingdom together, or would it shatter like glass under the weight of its own revelations? With a final glance toward the glittering ballroom, the jester stepped back into the shadows, ready to play his part in the greatest masquerade of all. I never fancied myself much of a prisoner, but there I was, locked in a cell so dimly lit and damp that even the rats seemed to have moved out. The stone walls closed in like an overzealous hug, and the silence was thick enough to choke on. Yet, in the midst of all this gloom, I found my greatest weapon, not a sword or a spell, but my own ridiculousness. My cell was a far cry from the lively courts I was used to. No jesters, bells jingled here, only the dull drip-drip of water echoing in the shadows. I paced, my patched sleeves brushing the cold stones as I muttered to myself, weaving jokes from the bleak threads of my predicament. Is this a dungeon or a poorly run inn? I quipped aloud, voice ricocheting off the walls. If it's the latter, I demand better service and a complimentary room upgrade. No laughter answered, but the shadows seemed to twitch with amusement. In a kingdom where lies were currency and truths were as rare as a sober bard, my honesty was a dangerous sort of magic. Here, in the enemy's hands, it was my lifeline. Captain Grimwald, the commander of this gloomy fortress, was a man who clearly lacked a sense of humor. No surprise there. When he finally came to interrogate me, his heavy boots echoing ominously, I was ready. He stood over me, a towering figure clad in dark armor that seemed to swallow the meager light. His eyes, sharp and cold, searched for weakness. I gave him a smile that was part fool, part fox. "So, the jester becomes the prisoner," he growled. "Tell me, fool, what do you hope to gain with your petty tricks?" "Only to brighten your day, Captain," I replied, bowing my head in mock respect. "After all, laughter is the best armor, wouldn't you agree? Though I must admit, it's a poor substitute for chainmail." His scowl deepened, but I caught the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Humor, it seemed, was a thorn in his side. Days passed, though it's hard to keep track when your world is a cramped stone box. My solitude was interrupted by a flicker of rebellion in the form of Myra, a young guard whose eyes betrayed a secret amusement at my antics. Under the pretense of routine checks, she slipped me a tiny scrap of enchanted parchment. "For your escape," she whispered, a conspiratorial glint in her gaze. The magic in that scrap was subtle but powerful, a charm that could open locks, but only if applied with the right timing and a dash of flair. I tucked it away like a secret joke waiting for its punchline. The moment came unexpectedly. A clatter in the corridor, guard tripped over his own boots, sending a cascade of armor plates crashing to the floor. Laughter bubbled from my lips, echoing through the halls like a spell. Guards came rushing, confusion rippling through their ranks like a poorly rehearsed play. I seized the moment, unlocking my cell with the enchanted parchment and slipping into the shadows. Every step was a gambit, ducking behind pillars, mimicking the guards' shouts, and weaving through the maze-like corridors with the grace of a drunken cat. My colorful jester's garb was a beacon amidst the gloom, but it was my laughter and quick tongue that threw them off balance. "Catch the fool," they yelled, but their voices faltered as I turned their own illusions against them. Mistaking each other for me, they stumbled, collided, and cursed, turning the fortress into a stage 4 slapstick farce. By the time I burst into the open air, heart pounding and breath ragged, the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and rose. Freedom tasted sweeter than any jest I'd ever told. Yet, this was only the beginning. My escape was a signal, a promise that even in chains, a fool could outwit kings and conquerors alike. The war of illusions was far from over, but I had learned that truth, wrapped in humor, was a weapon sharper than any blade. As I vanished into the morning mist, my laughter lingered behind, a reminder to friend and foe alike, in a kingdom built on lies, the fool's truth was the greatest magic of all. But the question remained, how far could humor carry a king when the stakes were as high as the throne itself? The answer, like all good jokes, was just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The morning mist curled like a lazy serpent through the dense forest, wrapping the ragtag army in a damp, chilly embrace that seemed to slow time itself. Jasper, the jester turned king, stood at the forefront of the motley procession. His motley clothes, a splash of irreverent color against the muted greens and browns of the wild. His bells jingled softly with every cautious step, a subtle reminder to all that even in the gravest moments, a fool's heart could still beat with courage. Behind him shuffled the army of idiots, each one a patchwork of quirks and oddities. Bramble the blunderer stumbled over a gnarled root, sending a clatter of armor plates tumbling down the slope, eliciting a chorus of groans and stifled laughter. Mira, the melancholy mage, eyes clouded with worry yet shining with quiet resolve, scanned the shadows for signs of the enemy's illusions. Sir Gafor's boisterous laughter broke the tension like a sudden summer storm, rallying the weary soldiers with the sheer force of his mirth. "Keep moving, you lot," Jasper called, his voice steady despite the knot of nerves tightening in his stomach. "Remember, truth and folly go hand in hand. If we lose sight of either, we lose everything." The forest seemed alive with whispers, some real, some conjured by the enemy's deceptive magic. Suddenly, flickering figures appeared between the trees, their forms shifting and shimmering like smoke caught in a breeze. An ambush, chaos erupted. Soldiers shouted, weapons clanged, and the ground trembled with the stampede of frightened horses and panicked feet. But Jasper's voice cut through the din, sharp and clear. "Laugh at their tricks. They feed on fear, and laughter starves them." He brandished his scepter, not as a weapon, but as a conductor's baton, orchestrating a symphony of absurdity. Sir Gafor charged, his laughter booming like thunder, disorienting the illusionary foes. Bramble, despite tripping over his own feet, managed to trip an enemy into a puddle of enchanted mud. Myra's spells, laced with a touch of melancholy and fierce determination, dispelled the shimmering deceits one by one. Victory, however small, tasted sweet. As the last illusion dissolved into mist, the soldiers found themselves grinning, breathless and enlivened. It was a reminder if they could survive the enemy's tricks, perhaps the impossible was within reach. Night fell, draping the encampment in a quilt of stars. Around the crackling campfire, stories flew like sparks. Tales of past blunders and narrow escapes wove a tapestry of laughter and camaraderie. Even Mira, usually so reserved, found herself chuckling at Bramble's latest mishap, her gloom momentarily lifted. Jasper listened, heart swelling with pride. This was no ordinary army. These were fools, yes, but fools with spirit, wit, and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of hardship and humor. At dawn, standing atop a windswept hill, Jasper gazed over the rugged landscape that stretched before them. The path ahead was treacherous, the battles uncertain, but the foolish light in his eyes burned bright. "Onward," he declared, "for truth, for folly, and for the kingdom that dared to believe in both." And with that, the idiot's march resumed dorkward, noisy but unstoppable. The road was long, the dangers many, but in the heart of the Jester King and his army of misfits, hope was alive, flickering like the bells on his cap, ready to ring out a new era of truth and laughter. I have always believed that truth was the sharpest weapon in a fool's arsenal, clean, piercing, and unflinching. Yet, as I sit here in the aftermath of what could only be described as a social calamity, I find myself wondering if truth, in its purest form, might sometimes be the cruelest jest of all. The day began with the usual courtly bustle, a cacophony of silk rustling, whispered schemes, and the ever-present scent of roasted pheasant and spiced wine. I strode into the council chamber, fool's cap bobbing with each step, ready to dispense my usual brand of honesty with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. My advisors were gathered, Lady Mirabelle, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, Sir Reginald, ever loyal but prone to gruffness, and Master Fizzlewick, whose eccentricity was matched only by his arcane knowledge. "We are vulnerable," I declared without preamble. "Our defenses are paper thin, and our alliances as fragile as a soap bubble in a tempest." A heavy silence settled. Lady Mirabelle's lips pressed into a thin line, Sir Reginald's brow furrowed deeply, and Master Fizzlewick twirled his beard thoughtfully. I fancied myself a herald of brutal honesty, the kingdom's lone beacon of truth amid a sea of carefully crafted falsehoods. But as the day wore on, the consequences of my candor began to unfold. At the midday feast, my attempt to address the visiting Duke of Fenwick with unvarnished truth backfired spectacularly. "Your Grace," I said, "your new silk cloak is as gaudy as a marketplace tent and quite unbecoming of a man of your stature." Gasps rippled through the hall. The Duke's face reddened, and I could see the wheels of offense turning rapidly in his mind. What I intended as an honest observation struck like a slap, and the room's atmosphere thickened with discomfort. Lady Mirabelle later cornered me in the gardens, her expression a mixture of exasperation and concern. "Jasper," she whispered amid the fragrant blooms, "truth is not a blunt instrument to be wielded without care. There are times when silence or even a white lie serves the greater good." I bristled at the notion. Was I to become a courtier, weaving webs of deceit like the rest? Yet, beneath her words lay a wisdom I could not dismiss. That night, alone in my chambers, I gazed out at the moon-dappled courtyard. The shadows played tricks on my mind, much like the illusions we face on the battlefield. I pondered Lady Mirabelle's counsel and the uneasy alliance between honesty and diplomacy. Could I remain the fool who tells the truth without alienating those I must lead? Was there a way to balance candor with tact? To forge a path that honored my nature yet secured the kingdom's fragile peace? The dawn brought no easy answers, only the resolve to try. For a fool's journey is never straightforward, but it is one worth taking, especially when the fate of a kingdom hangs in the balance. And so, I prepare for the challenges ahead, knowing that truth, like laughter, can be both a bomb and a blade. The question remains, which will it be when the next curtain rises? But that, dear reader, is a tale for another time. The sun was dipping behind the crooked spires of the castle when I found myself wandering the royal garden, a place where the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and something far less wholesome. There, twisting and curling among the hedges like a vine that had grown too clever for its own good, was the whispering vine. It shimmered faintly, crimson flowers glowing softly like little lanterns in the dusk. The air around it thrummed with an energy both beguiling and unsettling. It was, quite literally, a plant of lies. I had always thought lies were straightforward affairs, deceptions told to gain advantage or avoid consequences. But this vine, this living embodiment of enchantment, was unlike any falsehood I'd encountered. It whispered to the courtiers who passed by, weaving sweet nothings that made the bruises in their hearts feel lighter, the wounds in their bodies ache less. It promised comfort and healing, and in its presence, the world seemed a little less cruel. Yet beneath that soothing veneer lurked a subtle poison, a slow erosion of truth that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our kingdom. I paused, watching a noble woman pause beside the vine, her eyes fluttering closed as its tendrils curled gently toward her. The lie it told her was soft and tender, a balm for her grief. But the moment she opened her eyes again, they were clouded, a flicker of confusion and forgetfulness shadowing her gaze. It was a lie that healed, yes, but also one that blinded. "You look troubled," a voice said behind me. Lady Miralda stepped into the fading light, her robes trailing softly on the gravel path. "The vine has a strange magic. It soothes pain, yes, but at a cost few understand. It's a paradox," I admitted, turning to face her. "A lie that heals, but also harms. How can I, the one who must speak truth, reconcile that?" She smiled faintly, her silver hair catching the last rays of the sun. "Sometimes, truth is a blade too sharp for the soul. A gentle untruth can be a salve, but if left unchecked, even the gentlest lie can grow poisonous. Her words echoed in my mind as we walked to the healing chamber, where soldiers from the front lines lay recovering. Lady Meralda worked tirelessly, her hands weaving herbs and spells into remedies. She shared stories of how the vine's magic had eased the pain of many, allowing them to endure wounds that would otherwise have broken them. Yet, as I watched, I noticed the subtle shadows beneath their eyes, the flickers of uncertainty in their smiles. The vine's enchantment was a double-edged sword, and the kingdom was caught in its thorns. Back at the council chamber, the tension was palpable. Sir Bumblescratch, ever earnest and clumsy, stumbled over his words while trying to report strange behaviors among the court. "It's as if the truth slips away when that vine's near," he said, his voice cracking. "People forget what's real and what's not." The room erupted into nervous murmurs. The idea that a plant could wield such power was absurd, yet undeniable. I realized this enchanted lie was not merely a deception, but a force that shaped our reality and emotions in ways we had not anticipated. Determined to confront this threat, I returned to the garden under the cloak of night. The moonlight bathed the whispering vine in a silvery glow, its flowers pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I spoke to it not with anger or command, but with questions born of bewilderment and hope. "Why do you lie to heal? What do you gain by twisting truth?" I asked. The vine responded, not in words, but in a surge of images and feelings, kaleidoscope of sorrow, longing, and desperation. It was born from the kingdom's collective need to soften harsh realities, to protect its people from unbearable truths. Yet its magic was a dangerous gift, for in healing, it also enslaved. The lie, no matter how gentle, shaped minds and hearts, making them dependent on illusion rather than reality. I stood there, caught between my oath to truth and the undeniable mercy the vine's lies offered. Could I destroy this enchantment and risk tearing away the comfort it provided? Or should I allow the kingdom to live in a delicate balance of truth and deception, knowing that both could wound or heal? The night air was thick with magic and moral complexity as I pondered the path forward. In the kingdom where only the Jester told the truth, I faced the greatest paradox of all, that some lies might be too precious to abandon, even as they threatened to unravel everything we held dear. And so, with a heavy heart and the weight of a fool's crown upon my head, I prepared to choose a choice that would redefine truth, lies, and the fate of a kingdom built on both. But as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. The enchanted lie was not just a threat to be vanquished, but a mirror reflecting the very soul of our world, and in that reflection, the Jester must find his way. The game of truth and illusion was far from over, and the next move belonged to me. It was a peculiar morning in the kingdom when the court buzzed louder than a beehive shaken by a clumsy child. Rumors, like wildfire on a dry summer day, had ignited a particularly nasty whisper campaign. The Jestius, the very fool who had stumbled upon the throne, was but a puppet. Not just any puppet, mind you, but one controlled by some unseen hand. A shadowy mastermind pulling strings from behind the velvet curtains. Now, the Jester had dealt with many things in his short reign. Enchanted lies, absurd armies, and illusions that bent reality more than a drunken acrobat bends a pole. But nothing quite tickled his fancy like the idea of being a puppet. "A puppet," he muttered, spinning one of his colorful bells between his fingers. "If I'm a puppet, then I demand better strings. These feel cheap." The first to fan the flames was Lady Malvella, the Queen's former advisor who had taken to skulking about the court like a cat eyeing a particularly nervous mouse. She had a talent for twisting words until they snapped like brittle twigs, and her latest trick was painting the Jester as a marionette dancing to a tune only the Shadow Master could hear. "Your Majesty," she had whispered at the last council meeting, her voice dripping with honeyed poison, "surely you see how convenient it is for certain individuals to have a fool on the throne." The Jester had smiled, a slow curling of lips that held more mischief than madness. "Convenient, my dear Lady Malvella. If I am convenient, then you are the court's favorite headache." But the rumor mill churned onward, and soon even Sir Bumble, the royal herald notorious for tripping over his own words and feet, was delivering garbled messages about secret puppeteers. The palace halls echoed with whispers, and the Jester knew that if he did not act, his reign would become the punchline of every tavern joke from here to the mountains. So he devised a plan, one befitting a king who owed his throne to a fool's luck and a tongue sharper than a dragon's tooth. He would hold a public audience in the palace square, a place where truth and laughter could mingle freely under the open sky. On the day of the speech, the square brimmed with expectant faces, nobles draped in finery, commoners with dirt-smudged cheeks, and even the odd wandering minstrel who had heard tales of the Jester King's antics. Banners snapped in the wind, and the scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the sharp tang of anticipation. The Jester stepped onto the dais, his bells jingling a merry tune. Friends, subjects, and those who snuck in disguised as pigeons, he began, bowing with theatrical flair. "I stand before you not as a puppet, but as a man who once tripped over his own feet and landed squarely on the throne." Laughter rippled through the crowd, a wave that lifted the spirits of even the most skeptical. "They say I am controlled by shadows," he continued, eyes glinting. "But if that is true, then I must say these shadows are remarkably poor at sending me coherent notes. Last week, I was told to invade the neighboring kingdom with a battalion of singing frogs. I tried. The frogs refused, citing union rules. More laughter. No, my friends, if I have any strings, they are tangled in my own foolishness, and I rather like it that way. For a puppet cannot laugh at its own jokes, nor can it stumble into victory by sheer accident." The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound like a burst of sunlight through a stormy sky. Behind the scenes, Lady Malvola scowled, her carefully woven web unraveling before her eyes. Meanwhile, Sir Bumble, who had been nervously pacing the sidelines, tripped over a loose stone and fell flat on his face, a moment of slapstick that even the most serious noble could not suppress a chuckle over. Yet, as the day waned and the sun dipped below the horizon, a different scene unfolded. In the palace gardens, bathed in silver moonlight, a figure cloaked in shadows watched the festivities with unreadable intent. The Shadow Master, whose name was whispered but never spoken aloud, smiled thinly. The game was far from over. "They believe the puppet show has ended," the Shadow Master murmured, voice like a silk thread sliding through the air. But the strings have merely shifted. Back in the grand hall, the Jester returned to his chambers, bells softly jingling as he removed his cap. His reflection in the mirror caught his eye, and for a moment, the Fool King pondered the strange paradox of his reign. A man who told the truth in a kingdom built on lies, yet whose own freedom was questioned by the very people he sought to lead. "Puppet or not," he whispered to his reflection, "I will dance to my own tune, and may it be a tune loud enough to drown out the whispers." Outside, the night deepened, and the kingdom held its breath, caught between shadows and laughter, truth and illusion. The Fool King stood at the crossroads of power, his fate as uncertain as the next joke on his tongue. And somewhere, In the tangled web of plots and prophecies, the first thread of a new conspiracy began to pull. What strings would the Jester cut? What puppets would he unmask? And could a fool truly be king without losing his soul or his sense of humor? Only time would tell. But for now, the stage was set, the players assembled, and the greatest act of all was about to begin. It began just after the sun slipped below the horizon, casting the kingdom's war camp into a twilight haze that felt heavier than usual. At first it was subtle, a flicker in the corner of the eye, a whisper of movement where nothing should have been. Then it became impossible to ignore. Doubles. Not metaphorical, not figurative, but literal, magical copies of the Jester and his closest allies, shimmering with an eerie glint and grinning with unsettling familiarity. I was the first to notice my own double, or rather, my double noticed me. It happened in the war tent, where maps lay sprawled like an ancient beast across the table, and the smell of damp parchment mingled with candle smoke. The flickering light caught the double's distorted features, and the air seemed to hum with the faint, discordant jingling of bells, as if my cap's usual cheerful chime had been twisted into a mocking sneer. "Well, this is a fine mess," I muttered, eyeing the imposter whose grins stretched too wide, whose eyes betrayed a flicker of malevolence beneath the fool's facade. "You're the real one, right?" Lady Mirabelle asked when she found me staring at the apparition. Her voice was steady, but the crease between her brows told a different story. "Because there's one of you outside arguing with Grimwald, and neither seems inclined to listen to the other." Grimwald, that mountain of a man with his scarred face and heavy mace, was indeed locked in what appeared to be a heated debate with his own double. The two were nearly indistinguishable, save for the subtle twitch of the imposter's smirk and the unnatural stillness of his stance. I had to admit, the sight was more comical than terrifying, if only it weren't so dangerous. The enemy's illusionist had outdone himself. Council meetings turned into absurd spectacles of confusion. At one point, two Lady Mirabelles sat across from each other, their voices overlapping in a dizzying echo beneath the vaulted stone ceilings. One insisted on a cautious approach, the other was aggressively optimistic, and neither would yield. The real Lady Mirabelle's frustration was palpable, but the others, the copies, seemed to delight in stoking discord. Soldiers on the field were no better. At dawn, the battlefield was shrouded in mist that curled like ghostly fingers around the ranks. The men and women hesitated, torn between following their true commander, Grimwald, or the perfect imitation standing beside him. The silence was punctuated only by distant cawing crows, a natural chorus to the surreal drama unfolding. In the midst of this chaos, it was my job as full king, and the only honest voice in a kingdom drowning in lies, to see through the smoke and mirrors. My truth-telling nature, once a source of courtly annoyance, became my greatest weapon. I had to trust my instincts, those tiny flickers of discomfort and inconsistency that betrayed the falsehoods. The confrontation was inevitable. Back in the war tent, I faced my double once more. Our eyes locked, and I realized the battle wasn't just physical but psychological, a dance of wits and wills. "Why me?" I asked, voice low. "Why create a fool's double?" The imposter's grin deepened, but there was no warmth in it. Because fools are dangerous. They see what others miss. They speak what others hide. And chaos is the perfect cloak for deception. Their words are stung, but they rang true. The illusion was designed not just to confuse, but to fracture trust, to make allies doubt each other and themselves. The stakes were higher than ever. Yet, even as the doppelgangers sowed discord, our resolve hardened. Trust, I realized, was not about perfection or certainty, but about the belief in one another's intention and character. I called a meeting, not to confirm identities, that was impossible, but to remind my council and army of what bound us, shared purpose, shared trials, and the truth behind our laughter. We are not defined by appearances, I told them, standing before the gathered crowd in the great hall, but by the choices we make when the mirrors crumble. It was a risky gamble, relying on faith rather than evidence, but it rekindled the flickering flame of unity. Still, as night draped the castle battlements in a swirl of purples and golds, I stood alone, contemplating the fragile line we walked between truth and illusion. The silence was a gentle reminder that in this war, the mind was the battlefield, and the dance of the doppelgangers was far from over. I jingled my cap thoughtfully. Fools and doubles, I mused aloud, two sides of the same coin. And I suppose it's up to me to decide which face to show the world next. The wind whispered back, carrying with it the promise of more tricks, more truths, and the unending game that was our kingdom's fate. To be continued. If you asked anyone in the land what the most foolish thing a king could do was, most would mutter something about invading a neighboring kingdom without an army, or perhaps marrying a dragon for political alliance, or even more sensibly declaring war on a cloud. But to stand in the very eye of a storm of magical illusions and shout the unvarnished truth, that, dear reader, was the Jester's gambit. The war council tent was a cacophony of nervous whispers, the rustling of maps, and the occasional, unintentional clatter of a dropped dagger. Captain Quibble, looking more confused than ever, leaned over a parchment that might have been a battle plan or a recipe for Stewhard to tell under the candlelight. Now, listen here, the Jester began, his voice a mix of jest and command. We're not going to win this war by playing by the usual rules. Our enemy's strength lies not in swords or spears, but in shadows and smoke illusions that bend reality like a drunk wizard's wand. Madame Mira nodded, her eyes gleaming with a mix of respect and skepticism. And your solution, your majesty? Truth, the Jester said simply, jingling the bells on his cap. A simple, brutal truth. Nothing fancy. No magic, no smoke and mirrors. Just the stark, naked facts. A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. Captain Quibble scratched his helmet. You want us to march into battle shouting the truth? Won't that just confuse the enemy? Precisely, the Jester replied, a grin tugging at his lips. Confuse them so badly that their own illusions collapse under the weight of their confusion. The plan was as absurd as the Jester himself, to use the power of unfiltered honesty as a weapon against the enemy's deceptions. The soldiers were to wear no armor that could reflect illusions. Instead, they would carry mirrors to catch and redirect the enemy's spells, while the Jester would be at the front, ringing his bells and calling out truths that were too inconvenient to ignore. As dawn broke, the battlefield stretched out like a canvas painted in shades of uncertainty. The great illusionist's forces shimmered and flickered, their forms shifting endlessly, one moment fierce knights, the next distorted shadows with eyes like burning coals. The Jester stepped forward, bells jingling a merry tune that cut through the eerie silence. Behold, he shouted, your king stands before you, not cloaked in lies or hidden behind shadows, but as he is a fool and a truth-teller. The illusions wavered, some faltering under the weight of his words. Soldiers on both sides blinked, unsure if what they saw was real or yet another trick. Captain Quibble shouted orders, rallying the troops to hold the line with mirrors raised. Amidst the chaos, the Jester found himself face to face with the great illusionist. Their duel was less a clash of weapons and more a dancer, dizzying spectacle of shifting realities and biting wit. The illusionist conjured landscapes that twisted and turned, attempting to trap the Jester in a labyrinth of his own fears and doubts. But the Jester laughed, a clear, ringing sound that seemed to cut through the very fabric of the illusions. "Oh, come now, isn't this all a bit tedious?" he quipped. "Truth's a far better jester than you'll ever be." With a final flourish, the Jester produced a small mirror, catching a fragment of the illusionist's magic and reflecting it back. The illusion shattered like glass, and with it, the enemy's confidence. The tide turned swiftly. The Jester's army, emboldened by their king's courage and clarity, pressed forward, their laughter breaking the oppressive silence that had hung over the battlefield for so long. When the sun finally set, the illusions lay broken, the enemy scattered, and the Jester stood victorious, bells tinkling softly in the evening breeze. Yet, as he looked out over the field, he knew this was but a gambitter daring move in a larger game, with many more truths to tell and many more fools to rally. "Onward, my friends," he called, "for the greatest jest is the one that changes the world." And so the game continued, with truth and folly entwined in a dance as old as time itself. The air was thick with a fog that wasn't quite fog, shimmering and shifting like a bad dream caught in a hall of mirrors. The battlefield stretched out before Usa, chaotic carnival of illusions that would have made a sane man weep or at least question his eyesight. Dragons that breathed not fire but bursts of uncontrollable laughter soared overhead, their scales gleaming with every color of phantom armies marched, their banners fluttering with impossible slogans and their footsteps echoing like the slapstick soundtrack of a farce. I stood at the forefront, the weight of my motley cap a comforting reminder that, perhaps, the world was still a little sane. My bells jingled with every breath, a sound both ridiculous and reassuring. "Listen up, you magnificent fools," I shouted, voice slicing through the cacophony. "Today, we fight not just with swords, but with the truth. Remember, no matter what they show you, no matter how convincing the lies, the only real magic here is honesty, a bit of well-timed slapstick." Grumble, our reluctant knight, was already in the thick of it. The poor sod slipped on what looked like a puddle of quicksilver, arms flailing wildly as he careened into a cluster of invisible enemies. Instead of a disaster, his clumsy tumble sent opponents sprawling, their illusionary forms flickering and fading like bad TV signals. By the king's missing crown, Grumble grunted, pushing himself up with a sheepish grin. I meant to do that. Beside me, Mimsy, the Whisperer, melted into the shadows, her quiet footsteps barely a whisper against the madness. Where Viridian's illusions screamed with colors and sound, she moved with the subtlety of a secret, unraveling the tangled lies one careful truth at a time. Her whispers were like soft knives, cutting through enchantments that had held the kingdom in fear for too long. Captain Clodhopper, bless his squeaky boots, led a charge that looked more like a dance gone wrong than a military maneuver. Yet somehow, his bumbling bravado rallied the troops, turning confusion into a contagious kind of courage. His shouts left, right, no, wait, just follow me, became the battle cry of a ragtag army, proving that bravery does not always require grace. And then there was Viridian, the master illusionist, whose shimmering cloak seemed to swallow the light itself, conjured a spectacle that would have dazzled and disoriented any lesser foe. Dancing lights shaped like mocking faces, echoing voices that whispered fears and doubts. It was a spell woven from the very fabric of deception. But as he raised his hands, weaving magic through the air like a conductor of chaos. I stepped forward, a grin playing on my lips. "Oh, Viridian," I called out, voice ringing clear amid the madness. "Is that the best you've got? I've seen more convincing trickery in a toddler's tantrum." Our duel began atop a tower of illusions, the world around us flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. Words were our weapons, each phrase a spell that bent reality. I juggled truth and folly with a flair only a fool could master, while Viridian countered with dazzling deceptions and biting sarcasm. "You think honesty can defeat magic?" he sneered, eyes glinting with contempt. "Truth is just another lie waiting to be dressed up." "Maybe," I said, twirling my scepter with a flourish, "but at least it's a lie that wears its own shoes. None of this fancy footwork." The tower trembled beneath us as our words shook the foundations of the illusions. With one final jest, I toppled the grand spectacle, and the spell shattered like glass. The battlefield cleared, and the once maddening fog lifted to reveal a kingdom breathing freely for the first time in ages. The army cheered, laughter ringing out not as a weapon, but as a celebration. We had fought not just with swords, but with the courage to face the absurdity of our world and the truth that lay beneath it. In the end, it was bravery and belief fueled by a fool's heart that turned the tide. As I looked out over the field strewn with the fading remnants of illusions and the tired but triumphant faces of my comrades, I knew this was just the beginning. For in a land where lies had long ruled, the battle for truth was never truly over, but, at least now, it was a fight worth having. "Onward, my friends," I called, bells jingling with renewed hope. For today, the fool reigns and the truth prevails. And with that, the battle of bullshit and bravery became a legend. A story told not just for its absurdity, but for the strange and wonderful magic that happens when honesty meets courage on the field of dreams. The day dawned with a peculiar brightness, as though the very sun had decided to join in the kingdom's collective sigh of relief. Jasper, the Jester, now King Jasper, stood on the palace balcony, his cap's bells jingling faintly in the morning breeze. Below him, the city roared with life, banners fluttered. A cacophony of cheers erupted like waves crashing against the ancient stone walls, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of spring. He grinned, a lopsided, weary smile that crept across his face despite the knot of uncertainty tightening in his gut. "Well," he muttered to no one in particular, "if this is ruling, I imagine the jesters have been holding out on me." Behind him, Sir Bumbleton shuffled in, his armor clanking softly, eyes wide as if still expecting a trap to spring from the shadows. "Your Majesty," he said, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard, "the council awaits your presence. They say it's time to discuss the spoils of war." Jasper sighed, the weight of the crown suddenly feeling less like a joke and more like a millstone. "Very well, Sir Bumbleton, lead the way. Let's see what riddles the grown-ups have prepared for me." The war room was a stark contrast to the vibrant jubilation outside. Maps sprawled across tables, dotted with pins and scribbled notes, while candles flickered in the drafty chamber, casting dancing shadows on weary faces. Lady Mirabelle stood near the hearth, her robes rustling softly as she turned to greet the new king. "Victory has a curious taste, Your Majesty," she said, her voice gentle but edged with caution, sweet on the tongue but bitter in the belly. Jasper nodded, placing his fingers on the map where the last battle had been fought. "I thought defeating the great illusionist would be the end of our troubles. Turns out, it's only the beginning." Sir Bumbleton cleared his throat. "The council is divided on how to proceed, sire. Some want to seize the enemy's lands outright. Others fear the power vacuum will invite worse chaos." Jasper rubbed his temples, the humor that once came so easily, now tangled in responsibility. "Honesty has served me well so far," he said, "but I fear the truth is a double-edged sword in court politics. How does one keep the laughter alive when the stakes are so high?" Lady Mirabelle approached, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Perhaps by remembering that even fools can teach kings a thing or two." That evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of purple and gold, Jasper wandered into the royal garden. The scent of blooming jasmine wrapped around him like a soft cloak, and petals drifted lazily in the breeze. Here, away from the scheming and the endless demands, he found a moment of peace. "You wear the crown well," Lady Mirabelle said quietly, appearing beside him as if summoned by the fading light. Jasper chuckled. "It feels heavier than it looks. But then, I suppose fools are used to carrying burdens no one else sees." She smiled, a rare and genuine expression that warmed the cool air between them. "Remember, even the heaviest crown can be balanced with a light heart." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of guards escorting the great illusionist through the castle corridors. His shimmering cloak flowed like liquid starlight, eyes sharp and gleaming with a mixture of defiance and reluctant respect as they met Jasper's gaze. "So, Fool King," the illusionist said with a wry smile, "you've won the battle. But can you win the war for your soul?" Jasper met the challenge without flinching, the lessons of the past weeks echoing in his mind. "Perhaps," he replied, "but only if I remember that sometimes the greatest magic lies in laughter and truth, even when the road ahead is uncertain." As the corridor's torches flickered, casting long shadows on stone, Jasper realized that victory was not a destination but a journey, one that demanded courage, wisdom, and a touch of foolishness. And with that thought, he stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next with a jester's heart and a king's resolve. But just as the castle settled into uneasy peace, a whispered rumor began to stir, one that promised the next chapter of this strange and wonderful tale would be anything but dull. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, proclamations, and the kind of chaos that only a kingdom freshly freed from illusion could know. Jasper found himself pulled in a dozen directions at once, from disputes over land rights to the delicate negotiations with neighboring realms, still wary of their new king's reputation. His truth-telling, once a weapon against deception, now required careful calibration. A blunt truth could shatter alliances. A well-placed jest could ease tensions, but missteps were costly. The court became a stage where every smile might hide a dagger, and every word was weighed for meaning beyond its surface. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there were moments of genuine connection. Sir Bumbleton, despite his bumbling ways, proved an invaluable confidant, his loyalty steadfast even when Jasper doubted himself. Lady Mirabelle continued to be a beacon of calm, her wisdom a steady anchor in the swirling storm. One afternoon, Jasper convened his council, the room buzzing with heated debate over the treatment of prisoners captured during the war. The great illusionist sat silently, watching with an inscrutable expression. "We must be just," Jasper declared, voice firm. "If we become the tyrants we fought against, what have we truly won?" Murmurs rippled through the council. Some nodded, others frowned. The illusionist finally spoke, voice smooth as silk. "Justice is a mirror, Your Majesty. It reflects the face of the one who holds it. Choose wisely what you see." Jasper met his gaze squarely. "Then I choose to see a kingdom where honesty and mercy hold equal weight." As the council slowly reached consensus, a tentative hope blossomed in the room. Perhaps, after all, the fool's reward was not just power or glory, but the chance to reshape the very soul of the kingdom. But as night fell and the castle quieted, Jasper knew the road ahead would test him in ways the battlefield never could. For in ruling, as in jesting, the greatest challenge was to remain true to oneself and to the people who looked to him, not just for laughter, but for light in the shadows. And with that, the Fool King prepared to face the dawn of a new era, where every smile hid a story, and every truth carried the weight of a kingdom's future. The story was far from over. Indeed, it was only just beginning. The sun had barely risen over the battered rooftops of the capital when I found myself perched atop the half-reconstructed watchtower, a vantage point that offered a panoramic view of what was, by all accounts, a kingdom in stitches, literally and figuratively. Below, the townsfolk were engaged in a spectacle that could only be described as organized chaos if one were feeling generous, or a circus act with catastrophic potential if feeling less so. Beams were hoisted with the enthusiasm of hopeful amateurs, walls plastered with the precision of blindfolded painters, and the air was alive with laughter, sometimes joyous, sometimes the nervous kind that escapes when you've just dropped a bucket of mortar on your own foot. I adjusted my fool's cap, its bells tinkling merrily as if mocking the seriousness of the task at hand. It was a strange sort of war we had fought, one where the weapons were truth and folly, and the battlefield was our very reality. Now, in the quiet aftermath, the war's echo was not silence, but the cacophony of rebuilding, both of stone and spirit. Lady Mimsy was already in the thick of it, her spectacles slipping down her nose as she attempted to marshal the townspeople for a meeting. Her notes, however, had become an unintended recipe book after a clerk's unfortunate mix-up, leading to a spirited debate over whether to prioritize stew or stonework. The resulting confusion was less a hindrance and more a highlight and emblem of our newfound approach to governance. Earnest, imperfect, and unmistakably human, General Bumble, bless his heart, had taken to leading the soldiers in rebuilding efforts with a zeal that was, frankly, more comical than commanding. Dressed in armor that clanked and clattered with every step, the soldiers marched through the streets in a parade that resembled a jig more than a display of military precision. Yet, beneath the mismatched banners and offbeat cadence, there was a sense of pride and camaraderie that no polished regiment could rival. In the midst of this, town crier Pippin darted about, his bell ringing incessantly as he broadcasted news with the kind of exuberance only found in those who believe the world is worth shouting about, even when it's a mess. His voice was a constant reminder that even amid ruin, the spirit of the people remained unbroken. Later that day, I found myself in an unusual tete-a-tete with King Eldrick, who had returned with the pomp and gravity expected of a monarch, but found himself somewhat disarmed by the absurdity of the situation. Our exchange was a dance of wit and sarcasm, each barb a thread weaving a tapestry of mutual respect beneath the farce. It was a moment that crystallized the paradox of our kingdom, that beneath the laughter and folly lay a profound truth about resilience and renewal. As dusk settled, casting long shadows over the patchwork city, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange alchemy that had brought us here. A kingdom built on lies, illusions, and enchanted foolishness had weathered a war fought with honesty and absurdity. Now, it was healing not with solemn proclamations or grand gestures, but with laughter, shared mishaps, and the stubborn refusal to take itself too seriously. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with more questions than answers. Could a kingdom truly thrive when its foundation was laughter? Was there strength in folly, wisdom in jest? These were not questions to be answered with pomp or decree, but lived and learned in the clumsy steps of a people rebuilding more than just walls. And so, as the stars blinked awake in the evening sky. I donned my cap a little straighter, ready to face whatever absurdities tomorrow would bring, because, in this kingdom, laughter was not just the best medicine, it was the very magic that held us together. But just as I was feeling a rare flicker of peace, a sharp clatter from the courtyard below caught my attention. Pippin's bell was ringing wildly, his voice rising in an excited shout. Perhaps the storm wasn't quite over yet. After all, in a land where illusions and truths danced a perpetual jig, the next act was always just around the corner. The grand doors of the throne room creaked open with an ominous groan that seemed far too theatrical for a mere entrance. I was midway through explaining to Lady Mirabelle how a cake made entirely of turnips could be considered a delicacy when the commotion began. All eyes turned as a figure stepped into the dim light, dust motes swirling in the sunbeams like tiny enchanted spirits. There he stood, King Aldrich, the original monarch of our little kingdom, looking every bit the part of a man who had been lost for several months in the royal wine cellar, or perhaps the neighboring kingdom's less reputable taverns. His crown was perched crookedly atop his head, a little worse for wear, and his royal robes bore more wrinkles than dignity. "Well, well," he said, voice rich with that authoritative timbre one expects from someone who's been told he's king since birth. "I see the fool has been playing dress-up in my absence." I bowed with all the exaggerated flair I could muster. "Your Majesty, or should I say, Your Highness of Hilarity. It's a pleasure to have you back from your mysterious disappearance. I was about to send a search party, but then I remembered how often I lose my own shoes." The courtiers held their breath, unsure whether to laugh or faint. Lady Mirabelle, ever the composed advisor, gave me a subtle nod, part warning, part encouragement. Sir Bumbleton shifted nervously, his mismatched armor clinking like a xylophone with every movement. King Aldrich's eyes narrowed, but a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You have a way with words, fool, but words do not make a king." "True," I said, "but neither does absence, apparently." Thus began the first act of what would soon be known as the Great Royal Rumble of Wit and Whimsy. The next morning, the throne room was filled with the buzz of whispered speculations and the rustling of silk and velvet. The two rulers sat opposite each other, the jester in his patchwork finery and the king in his slightly rumpled robes. The once proud crown now looking more like a hat someone had sat on. "I propose a council," Lady Mirabelle suggested, stepping forward. "A meeting of minds rather than swords." "Ah, a battle of wits," I said, grinning. "My favorite kind of battle." The council meeting was less a solemn gathering and more a theatrical performance. King Aldrich declaimed with the gravitas of a Shakespearean actor, while I replied with the irreverence of a street performer at a royal banquet. Courtiers exchanged nervous glances as the verbal jousting grew increasingly absurd. "If you think the crown suits you," King Aldrich said, "perhaps you would like to wear it properly." "I'd rather wear it as a hat," I replied. "It's less stuffy and more fashionable." The tension broke with a collective nervous chuckle, and Lady Mirabelle quickly moved the discussion towards more practical matters. As days passed, the palace became a stage for their ongoing rivalry. At the royal feast, the tension exploded into outright farce. King Aldrich attempted to assert his authority by commanding the band to play martial tunes, only for me to interrupt with a lively jig that had the courtiers clapping along in defiance of royal protocol. The highlight of the feast was, without doubt, the pie-throwing incident. It began as a subtle exchange of pastry-based insults, but quickly escalated into a full-scale food fight. By the time the royal guards intervened, Both men were covered in blueberry and custard, their dignity as splattered as the banquet hall. Yet, amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. In a rare, quiet moment among the palace gardens, as the sunset bled orange and pink across the sky, King Aldrich and I found ourselves alone. "You are a strange man, Jester," he said, picking a petal from a nearby rose. "Not the fool I expected." "And you are not the tyrant I feared," I replied. "It seems we are both more than our titles." He smiled, a genuine expression that softened the wrinkles of battle lines and courtly stress. "Perhaps there is room for both of us. A kingdom ruled by a king and a fool," I mused. "Sounds like the beginning of a joke, but one with a happy ending," he said. "The power struggle ended not with swords or decrees, but with laughter, mutual respect, and an agreement to share the burdens of leadership. The kingdom, ever a place of contradictions and enchanted lies, had found a new balance. And as the bells of the palace rang out a little off-key, naturally I could not help but think that maybe, just maybe, the truth was best served with a generous helping of folly. But of course, that is a story for another day. I have often wondered what a fool leaves behind when the bells have stopped jingling and the cap is hung up for the last time. Is it merely the echoes of laughter fading into the halls, or something more? As I sit here on the battlements, the dawn spilling gold over the rooftops like a careless painter's stroke, the kingdom stirs beneath me-market vendors shouting their wares, children chasing shadows, the distant toll of the bell calling the faithful to morning prayers. This is the tapestry of life I have been woven into, a thread of truth tangled among lies and illusions. Lady Mirabelle found me here as the sun stretched its fingers through the clouds, her steps quiet but sure. "Still lost in thoughts, Your Majesty," she teased, though her eyes held the weight of years shared in council. "Lost, found, or merely wandering," I replied, patting the rough stone beside me. "A fool's legacy is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, tied with a ribbon of laughter. But what is it really?" She settled down, her gaze following the bustle below. "Legacy is not carved in stone or inked in royal decrees," she said softly. "It lives in stories, in the truths that survive the distortions of time. You have changed this kingdom, not by conquest, but by shaking its foundations with honest folly." Her words stirred something within me, a mixture of pride and doubt. I thought of the army of idiots I commanded, their quirks and courage, the battles we fought not just with swords but with wit. I recalled the soothsayers' lies unraveled, the illusions shattered, and the laughter that became our shield and sword. Later, in the quiet of the council chamber, where the fire crackled and shadows danced, our conversation deepened. "Power is a curious thing," I mused. "It promises control, but often delivers chaos." And yet, Lady Mirabelle countered, "It is how one wields that chaos which defines a ruler. You wielded it with jest and honesty, turning conventions on their head." Her voice was a balm to my restless mind. I realized that my reign was never about dominion, but about disruption of lies, pretenses, and stagnant traditions. Scribbler the scribe burst into the study where I had taken refuge, waving a freshly inked scroll. "Your stories, my lord, chronicles that will sing your tale for generations." He read passages aloud, his voice weaving my follies and triumphs into legend. The rustle of parchment and his animated tone filled the room, bridging past and future. I listened, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Perhaps this was the true Legucia story told and retold, colored with laughter and truth. Even Captain Noodle, ever the bemused warrior, joined our circle with a grin. Who would have thought that a band of fools could rewrite history? I nodded, knowing that the army of idiots was not just a joke, but a symbol of hope and resilience. Our victory was not in might, but in the courage to be genuine in a world steeped in deception. As twilight fell, I found myself in the town square, surrounded by villagers and old comrades. I told them stories, some true, some twisted for effect, but all laced with the heart of our journey. Laughter bubbled up, mingling with tears, as stars blinked awake above us. In that moment, I understood. A fool's legacy is not a monument of stone or a crown of gold. It is the laughter shared, the truths spoken, and the bonds forged in the crucible of absurdity and honesty. It lives in the stories that outlast us, carried in the hearts of those who dare to question, to laugh, and to tell the truth. And so, as the night deepens and the echoes of my voice fade into the cool air, I wonder not with sadness, but with hope what tales will be told when I am but a whisper in the wind. For in the end, perhaps that is all any of us can ask. To be remembered not for the power we held, but for the truth we dared to speak, and the laughter we left behind. But of that, my friends, more in time. For the story is never truly finished, and a fool's tale is best told with a wink, a nod, and the promise of another jest just around the corner. If there was ever a moment when the kingdom could throw off the heavy cloak of solemnity and drape itself in a glittering toga of absurdity, this was it. The Grand Plaza, once a stage for royal decrees and whispered conspiracies, now thrummed with a new kind of life. Banners of every conceivable colorsome plane, some polka-dotted, others striped like zebras that had lost their way, fluttered wildly in the gentle breeze. The townsfolk, liberated from the shackles of pretense, had donned costumes so delightfully eccentric that even the most serious judge might have chuckled involuntarily. Hats with feathers that tickled ears, cloaks sewn from mismatched patches, and shoes that squeaked with every step painted the scene with hues of happiness. At the forefront of this vibrant cavalcade strode the Jester himself, his bells jingling a merry tune that seemed to coax smiles from even the surliest faces. His motley shimmered with a rainbow of colors, each patch telling a tale of past follies and triumphs. His sharp eyes gleaming with mischief and a spark of something deeper, perhaps wisdom disguised as jest, evade the crowd with affection. He lifted his cap in a sweeping bow, eliciting cheers and laughter that rippled through the gathered masses like a warm wave. Lady Mirabelle, the royal advisor and master of ceremonies, had outdone herself. Her gown shifted patterns unpredictably, from swirling vines to dancing stars, much to the delight and occasional surprise of those close enough to witness the magic. In one hand, she wielded a fan that occasionally squirted a fine mist of water, catching the afternoon sun in tiny prisms. Her voice rang clear and commanding as she orchestrated the ceremony, ensuring that every participant's absurdity was not only tolerated but celebrated. When a wayward spark of magic caused a puff of harmless smoke to erupt from the ceremonial podium, she merely curtsied with a flourish, turning what could have been a moment of panic into one of delight. The army of idiots, once a ragtag band of bumbling recruits, now marched with a newfound spirit. Sir Bumbleton, their earnest commander, led the charge with his mismatched armor clanking rhythmically. Inevitably, his helmet slipped over one eye just as he attempted a noble gesture, causing him to stumble into a precarious stack of juggling fools. The resulting domino effect sent performers tumbling in a cascade of laughter and playful shouts. Far from being embarrassed, Sir Bumbleton grinned sheepishly, his confusion only endearing him further to the crowd. This was no ordinary army, and this was no ordinary battle. It was a celebration of imperfections, a dance of delightful chaos that bound everyone together. Among the crowd, the great illusionist watched with a mixture of amusement and resignation. His swirling robes shifted colors like a sunset caught in a prism, his eyes twinkling with the recognition that sometimes the greatest magic was the one born from acceptance rather than deception. Having once been an adversary, he now found himself an ally in this curious experiment of harmony. Town crier Jinx added his own brand of mayhem to the festivities, his horn emitting unexpected sounds: a honk, a squeal, a brief burst of musical notes that kept the crowd on their toes, and laughter bubbling. His announcements, laced with pranks and playful jabs, reminded everyone that the line between truth and jest was best navigated with a smile. As twilight descended, the plaza transformed under the glow of lanterns shaped like stars, moons, and, fittingly, jesters' caps. Fireworks painted the night sky with bursts of color and shapes that danced like the kingdom's newfound spirit. From a balcony overlooking this sea of celebration, the jester stood quietly, a soft smile playing on his lips. The cacophony of laughter, music, and cheer was a balm to the soul, a reminder that even in a world built on lies and truths, there was magic to be found in embracing one's quirks and contradictions. He thought back to the days when honesty was a dangerous weapon, when every word could spark a war of illusions. Now, honesty had found its place alongside folly, not as a sword, but as a shared joke. The kingdom was no longer a place of secrets and shadows, but a mosaic of laughter and light. A kingdom of fools, he mused aloud, where folly is our fortress and laughter our legacy. And as the night deepened, the people danced on their hearts lighter, their bonds stronger, ready to face whatever absurdities the future might hold. Together, the chamber was thick with the scent of beeswax candles and old parchment, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the faces gathered in uneasy silence. Mara, the soothsayer, draped in her purple robes that shimmered faintly even in the dim light, stood before them clutching an ancient scroll. Her eyes, clouded with the haze of years but sharp as a hawk's talon, scanned the gathered courtiers before she began in a voice that wavered between solemnity and sly amusement. "Behold," she intoned, "the last prophecy, long hidden in the folds of time, now revealed to our kingdom." The scroll unfurled with a soft crackle, the faded ink tracing cryptic symbols and words that danced tantalizingly between sense and nonsense. The jester, perched awkwardly on the throne that felt far too grand for him, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration beneath the bells of his cap jingling softly with each movement. Sir Pumblechook, ever the nervous advisor, fidgeted beside the throne, his helmet slipping askew as he tugged at his mustache, eyes darting nervously between the soothsayer and his king. Mara cleared her throat and began to recite. When the fool's laughter fades at twilight's embrace, the shadow of the silent crow shall cross the face. Illusions will waver, truths will collide, and only the jester's echo shall be the guide. The room held its breath. Was it a warning, a riddle, or perhaps a jest at the very idea of prophecy itself? The jester's lips twitched into a half-smile, the gears in his mind already turning. Lady Rythe, the court historian and skeptic, stepped forward from the shadows, her voice sharp and measured. "Prophecies are as fragile as the paper they are written on," she said. "But this one, it feels different, unsettling." The jester nodded slowly, standing and pacing the length of the chamber. "Or perhaps," he mused aloud, "it's a reminder that stories are never finished, that the tale of our kingdom is still being written, one laugh, one tear, one truth at a time." Later, in the quiet sanctuary of the castle's library, Lady Rythe and the jester huddled over tomes and scrolls, their whispered debates echoing softly off the stone walls. The historian argued for logic and evidence. The Jester insisted on the magic of possibility. Between them, a fragile alliance formed, bridging the worlds of fact and folly. Outside, the kingdom stretched beneath a sky painted with the first hues of dusk. The Jester stepped onto the balcony, the cool evening breeze tugging at his robes. Before the assembled crowd below, he raised his hands, bells chiming softly. "Friends, fools, and future legends," he called out, "this prophecy may be a puzzle or a punchline, but it belongs to us all. The story continues, and I, for one, intend to see how it ends." A murmur of laughter and applause rippled through the crowd, the sound carrying on the wind like a promise. Somewhere between truth and jest, the kingdom found its heart again, beating steady and strange. And so, as stars began to prick the velvet sky, the last prophecy hung in the air, ambiguous, ironic, and alive with the promise of adventures yet to come. For, in a kingdom where only the Jester tells the truth, every ending is just another beginning. The bells in his cap jingled once more, a sound that was both a farewell and a call to arms. The fool's echo would carry on, weaving through the tapestry of time, reminding all who listened that sometimes the greatest magic lies in the stories we dare to tell. But what those stories might be, well, that was a secret only the Jester knew. And perhaps that was the most truthful prophecy of all. The morning sun spilled over the horizon like a slow, golden laugh, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard where I, the once fool and now outgoing king, stood alone. The bells on my cap tinkled softly in the dawn breeze, a delicate, familiar chime that seemed both absurd and oddly fitting for the moment. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh dew and blooming marigolds mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of old parchment and spilled ink from the night before. Today, I was not the Jester who whispered truths in riddles or the king who bumbled his way through court affairs. Today, I was simply a man about to say goodbye to a role he never asked for but somehow grew to love. Behind me, the palace slowly stirred to life, courtiers and soldiers gathering in the grand hall as word spread of my farewell ceremony. I could hear the faint murmur of voices, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and the unmistakable undercurrent of unease that always accompanies change. I adjusted my cap, the bells jingled in protest, and glanced down at the scepter resting on the balcony's stone railing. It gleamed with the weight of responsibility and absurdity alike, a symbol that had come to mean far more than just a piece of carved wood adorned with jewels. "Do you think I'm ready?" I muttered to the empty air, knowing full well that no one would answer except the ghosts of failed jokes past. As the hall filled, the air thickened with the scent of polished wood, spilled wine, and the faintest trace of burnt toasts, Sir Bumbleton's doing, no doubt. The motley crowd was a riot of colors and expressions. Some faces beamed with genuine affection, others masked suspicion or relief. Queen Mirabelle stood near the throne, regal and poised, her purple robes flowing like a river of dusk. She caught my eye and offered a nod that was both an invitation and a challenge. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots, a reminder that even royalty must tread carefully. Clearing my throat, I began, "Ladies, gentlemen, and those of you who haven't quite decided," I said, voice carrying a practiced ease. "Today marks the moment when this humble fool hangs up his cap and passes the crown. It's been a wild ride, full of more twists than a serpent's knitting pattern and more truths than a tavern full of gossipers can handle." Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the tension like a warm fire on a cold night. I pressed on, weaving satire with sincerity. "I came into this position quite by accident, much like a cat walking into a fish market and deciding it's now the proprietor. And yet, in this accidental reign, I have learned that truth is not always a sword to be wielded, but sometimes a candle to be lit. Not all lies are wicked, and not all truths are kind. The hall grew quieter, the weight of my words settling like dust on ancient tomes. Queen Mirabelle's gaze softened, and I saw in her eyes a flicker of understanding that transcended politics and power. So, as I stepped back into the shadows from which I came, I concluded, I leave you not just a kingdom, but a story of fools, laughter, and the strange magic that binds them. May it be told with joy and a pinch of salt. Applause erupted, sincere and heartfelt, mingling with a few tears and knowing smiles. As the crowd began to disperse, I approached Queen Mirabelle, extending the scepter with a flourish that was more theatrical than regal. Our hands met briefly, silent pact, forged in humor and hope. The kingdom is in good hands, I said softly, and the fool in better ones, she replied with a rare smile. Later, alone in my chambers, I found myself surrounded by relics of my journey-tattered costumes, faded letters, and the countless trinkets that had accompanied me from fool to king. Lighting a candle, I sat at the desk and took up my quill, scribbling a final note to whoever might someday find it. The words flowed like a whispered joke, tinged with the melancholy of farewell and the sweetness of memory. To those who come after, may you find laughter in your truth and truth in your laughter. And remember, sometimes the greatest magic lies in the courage to be a fool. I placed the quill down, the candlelight flickering as if in applause, and smiled. The story was ending, but the echo of the fool's laughter would linger on, forever part of the kingdom's soul. And as the bells on my cap jingled softly one last time, I knew that while crowns may be passed and roles may change, the spirit of the fool, the truth-teller, the laughter-maker would never truly leave. With a final bow to the empty room, I stepped out into the dawn, ready to face whatever came next. No longer king, but always the jester at heart. But of course, that's a tale for another time. If you had told me, when last I was merely the royal jester, that I would someday be the most honest man in a kingdom drowning in lies, I would have laughed loudly, and with all the bells on my cap jangling in agreement. But here we are, in a place where truth is as rare as a sober nobleman, and about as welcome. The court of King Reginald the Grandiose is a spectacle worthy of any farce, and I assure you, no one plays the fool quite like I do except, it seems, for the entire court itself. Each nobleman's word is a twisted ribbon of half-truths and outright fabrications, carefully woven to mask ambition, greed, or just plain boredom. The king himself, bless his pompous soul, lies with such flair you'd think he were auditioning for a play rather than ruling a kingdom. Yet, amidst this cacophony of deceit, I alone speak the truth. Not out of nobility or courage, mind you, but because it's simply too exhausting to remember lies. And so, armed with nothing but candor and a motley stitched from the remnants of court jesters past, I stand as the kingdom's singular beacon of honesty. Our story begins on a morning as bright and promising as a prank gone wrong. The great hall was filled to bursting with courtiers dressed in their finest hypocrisy. The scent of overcooked pheasant mingled with the faint aroma of desperation. King Reginald sat upon his throne, which looked far too heavy for him and just as unstable. Jasper, the king boomed, "Tell us a joke worthy of my greatness." I bowed deeply, the bells on my cap tinkling like the warning chimes of a sinking ship. "Your Majesty," I said, "the only joke here is that you believe your own proclamations." A gasp rippled through the hall. The Queen's smile froze, A nobleman choked on his wine, and the royal dog gave me a look that suggested it was reconsidering our friendship. "How dare you?" the king thundered. "You insult your sovereign." "I merely state the truth," I replied, grinning, which, in this kingdom, is a far more dangerous offense. This exchange, rather predictably, set the tone for the day. For in a land where everyone wears masks of lies, the fool's honesty is a dagger to the heart of comfort. Amidst this turmoil, Madame Vex took the stage. Draped in shadows and mystery, she unfurled an ominous prophecy that sent a shiver through the marble columns. "Beware," she intoned, her voice dripping like honey laced with venom, "for the war of illusions draws nigh. When the truth is the rarest coin, the kingdom shall tremble beneath the weight of its own deceptions." The court murmured nervously, though no one dared question her words aloud. Prophecies, after all, are like bad weather forecasts, mostly ignored until it rains frogs. Later, as the hall emptied and the day wore thin, I found myself wandering the castle's labyrinthine corridors, a place where secrets are whispered behind tapestries and shadows play tricks on even the most sober mind. It was in one such shadowed alcove that I overheard voices, low, urgent, and dripping with conspiracy. Figures cloaked in deception plotted moves that would ripple through the kingdom like a badly thrown pie. "The king's absence will be our chance," hissed one, and the fool asked another. "He will be useful," came the reply. "Useful, that's a word I'm not accustomed to hearing outside of foolish and unwelcome." As I retreated, my mind raced. The prophecy, the conspiracies, the king's strange behavior, these were threads in a tangled web that I, Jasper the Jester, was about to unravel. And so, dear reader, with a cap full of bells and a heart full of questions, I stand at the threshold of a story where truth is both weapon and curse, and a fool might just be the kingdom's last hope. But beware, in a land where lies are enchantments and honesty a curse, the line between wisdom and folly blurs like the face of a drunken minstrel at dawn. And trust me, you'll want to hold on tight, for this tale is only just beginning. The day ended as it began, with chaos, confusion, and a court that found my honesty more unsettling than any prophecy. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that even the loudest lie cannot drown out the ringing of a fool's truth. And that truth, dear reader, starts with me.